Chapter 235. Li Tianlan closed his eyes. The battle stopped, and the echo dissipated. The headquarters of the No. 6 Theater of Operations was in a mess, but it was extremely quiet. Standing in front of Li Tianlan, Di Jiang's eyebrows moved. He seemed to find it interesting, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised, showing a smile that was not kind but not indifferent. The boiling blood in his body calmed down. Li Tianlan's face grew paler and paler, and even gradually revealed a kind of bluish gray. He opened his eyes. His blurred vision finally became clear again, and the young man in front of him was clearly reflected in his sight. This was a young man with a perfect figure, nearly 1.9 meters tall, with an ape's back and a wasp's waist. Although his appearance looked gentle, as he raised the corners of his mouth, there was a trace of primitive wildness in his whole person. The most noticeable thing was that his arms were very long, and when they hung down naturally, they almost touched his knees. From the perspective of the opposite sex, this was undoubtedly a very attractive, even fatally attractive man. But looking at him, what Li Tianlan felt was power. Extreme power. But his code name was Di Jiang. Di Jiang's name first appeared in the wonderful book classic of Mountains and Seas. He was one of the ancestors of wizard in the myths and legends of Zhongzhou State, known to be extremely fast. He was full of power, but had such a weird code name. Even a fool would not think that his power and speed were in a state of imbalance. Li Tianlan said, "I don't understand what you mean." "It's very simple." Di Jiang looked at Li Tianlan calmly, but in Li Tianlan's mind, he felt that he had been firmly locked by him. "It will be very difficult for me to kill you here. Everything will be easy after I take you back." "I won't go," Li Tianlan said lightly. His voice was very light, but the absolutely condensed will was with coldness and determination that could break the world. Di Jiang said, "Oh," and made a move in an instant. His movement seemed not fast, but the two were more than 10 meters apart, and his arm directly covered Li Tianlan's shoulder at the first time. He was fast. Li Tianlan was faster. The moment his palm covered his shoulder, his body seemed to shake slightly, and he took a seemingly careless step forward to the left. One step was less than half a meter, but he narrowly brushed Di Jiang's palm and avoided it. Di Jiang's palm fell. Lightning flashed silently, and a palm-shaped palm print appeared on the ground. The palm print sank deep into the ground, leaving a palm-shaped hole in the ground. The power spread underground. There was a loud rumble. The wreckage within a radius of dozens of meters in the command center was instantly shattered. The house, the giant rock, and Yuekong's corpse were all turned into dust by the unparalleled power. The sky-piercing halberd fell to the ground. Li Tianlan casually waved his hand and held the sky halberd in his hand. Di Jiang looked at Li Tianlan with a smile on his face and said thoughtfully, "Interesting. Is this night walking?" Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed tightly. Rays of sharpness began to flash from his eyes, frantic and swift. Since he came to Changdao, this was the first time he felt such a great and even fatal danger. Di Jiang's smile was calm and almost gentle, but it was just a facade. This kind of calmness was completely a display of not taking anything to heart. He was unbridled and fearless. His every move was filled with extreme confidence. Night walking is said to be one of the most wonderful body movements in the dark world. The desperate chase of Sai City and the shadow formula of tribulation are both branches of night walking. The inheritance of Zhuanyuantai is indeed unparalleled, broad, and profound. Take night walking for example. Everyone knows that this body movement is fast, but is it speed or reaction? Boom! Li Tianlan's pupils suddenly contracted, and he didn't hesitate anymore. The two of them were only 1 or 2 meters away from each other. He jumped directly into the sky, and the sky-piercing halberd drew a blazing wave of fire in the night sky. The human emperor chopped down with all his strength from above. Night walking. It was one of the most mysterious unique skills in the map of God of War, which belonged to the Invincible Manual. For hundreds of years, Li Tianlan was the only one who practiced the Invincible Manual. Although the Invincible Realm warriors of the Li family could also learn some unique skills from the Invincible Manual, they didn't understand it as thoroughly as those who specialized in the Invincible Manual. That was why there were some specious unique skills. Night walking could be said to be a legendary unique skill, and in the legend, this set of body movement was fast. But was it fast or reaction? That was the essence of the technique. The silver human emperor fell from the sky, and in extreme sharpness cut the space in the wave of fire, followed by the silver shadow chopping down wildly. Bang! The human emperor chopped down solidly and hit the target. But it didn't hit Dijiang's head. Dijiang raised his hand expressionlessly. His palm went over the blade of the spear and held the body of the halberd tightly. The scarlet and complicated blade of the spear was only dozens of centimeters away from his forehead, but it couldn't go any further. Power! Once again, Li Tianlan felt the steady, surging, and almost unimaginable power. Too tender, Dijiang said, and his arms suddenly shook. The great power passed directly to Li Tianlan through the human emperor. Li Tianlan's whole body burst into a mist of blood, and a mouthful of blood gushed out of his mouth. Come down, Dijiang said. He pulled down his arm, and Li Tianlan, who was in the air, was almost pulled down without any resistance. His body began to fall. Dijiang held the human emperor weighing more than 50 kilograms in one hand, as light as a feather, and stretched out the other hand, trying to grab Li Tianlan's body. The air nearby was slightly twisted. A palm stretched out without any warning. It was a slender palm with slightly curved knuckles with thick calluses, and 5 fingers bent like a goshawk. Dijiang's face changed slightly, and a trace of killing intent suddenly appeared in his indifferent eyes. Get out! He suddenly opened his mouth, clenched his open palm into a fist, and hit the air. In an instant, the whole dark sky directly turned into a dazzling deep blue. Dijiang's entire figure abruptly turned into a dark blue ball of light, countless bolts of lightning exploding from his body without restraint. The sky and the earth were all deep blue in an instant. The loud rumbling sound spread unscrupulously in the whole forest. The wildly expanding lightning swept through the forest hundreds of meters around in an instant. Smash! Wherever the lightning passed, all tangible things within 100 meters were completely turned into nothingness. The power of one punch could destroy the world. But Dijiang's face was still gloomy. The moment the lightning burst out, he clearly saw that the palm that suddenly appeared also clenched into a fist. Their fists retracted as soon as they touched, and the next second, Li Tianlan's body had been grabbed by that palm. The man in black who suddenly appeared snatched Li Tianlan away. Dijiang held the human emperor in his hand. His eyes became cold and wild in an instant. He swept his eyes and looked directly in front of him. A thin black figure stood there quietly, with a black cloak covering his whole body. He carefully put Li Tianlan on the ground. Before Dijiang could speak, he reached out, pointed at the human emperor in Dijiang's hand, and said lightly, "Give it to me." That was the palm with which he had just punched Dijiang. There was blood on the palm, and even some white bones had been exposed. Dijiang's eyes were as cold as a knife. After a few seconds of silence, he sneered and said, "Good, very good. You snatched my prey, and now you dare to ask me for something? Not bad at all." He lifted his foot and stamped hard on the ground. Boom! A dull sound suddenly rose. Thunder and lightning suddenly rose. The whole earth shook violently in the unparalleled power, and one after another startling cracks began to extend on the earth. A dim blue light beam from the ground to the highest point of the sky suddenly became extremely bright. The light beam surged and spread to dozens of meters away, completely covering Li Tianlan and the man in black. The dim blue light was entangled wildly. A sword light suddenly rose in the light beam, tearing the night curtain and smashing the thunder and lightning. The sword light roared in the light curtain, and the vast expanse of dim blue did not cover the black figure. He stood in the endless dim blue thunder and lightning, motionless like a mountain. The sword light and the thunder and lightning dissipated silently. Dijiang stood where he was, expressionless. The black clothes on the man in black had been broken in large areas. He held the sword in one hand, and the blood flowed faster and faster on the palm of the hand holding the sword. Li Tianlan's consciousness gradually blurred, and he finally passed out. No wonder you have the double thunder veins. Your attack is really earth-shattering. But you want to kill the successor of the Li family in your first battle. Jiang Hongwei, is this the will of your master? The man in black glanced at Li Tianlan, and his tone suddenly became cold. Di Jiang's face became more serious, and he solemnly said, "Do you know me?" He was the only disciple of Wang Tianzong, but he had never fought. In recent years, he had been in charge of the research institute in North America. This was the first time he fought, but his identity was seen through at a glance. Di Jiang narrowed his eyes and stared at the man in black in front of him. He said flatly, "Who are you?" "Samsara." Saint took a step forward and protected Li Tianlan behind him. He said coldly, "Give it to me." His black robe was broken, and there was blood not only on his hands but also on his body. But his momentum was getting sharper. "Saint, I've heard of you." Di Jiang nodded. "The most mysterious supermaster in Samsara Palace, and also the most unworthy first supermaster, is you, right?" Saint did not speak. "You are no match for me." Di Jiang continued, "I'll give you a chance. Leave Li Tianlan and get out of here. If you dare to stay, not to mention you can't protect him, even you have to stay. I'm curious what kind of face you have under the cloak. How dare you call yourself Saint? Ridiculous." Saint was still silent, but the sword energy on him was getting sharper. But it was just pure sword intent. He knew why Di Jiang said he didn't live up to his name. During the years when Samsara was active in the Dark World, the 12 supermasters were famous, but Saint's battle record was not so earth-shattering. But his name was always listed side by side with Gong Sun Qi and Tribulation. As for his real strength, no one knew. Occasionally, he fought a few times, but under the circumstances that people could see, he did not show the strength of a top superior of the half-step invincible realm. Maybe he didn't live up to his name? Saint lowered his head and rubbed the long sword in his hand. It was a very ordinary long sword, as clear as water, but the material was ordinary. "Why don't you get out?" Di Jiang's smile gradually became cruel. "If I turn around, what awaits me may be a fatal blow. And you are not qualified to ask me to get out. It's better for your master to come." Saint said blandly. "How arrogant you are." Di Jiang smiled casually. "You are so arrogant. I'd like to see what kind of person you are." His figure suddenly disappeared on the spot. He had the double thunder veins, but he didn't feel clumsy at all. His figure flashed, and the distance between him and Saint was instantly shortened. Saint knew that this was not the so-called speed. This was the explosive power. The extreme explosive power. The lightning that was so dazzling that it could almost blind people rose up from the ground. In the sky filled with deep blue, there was a silver waterfall that flew straight down 300,000 feet. Human Emperor. The sky halberd, which was more than 2 meters long, suddenly burst out an incredible power in Di Jiang's hand. The silver halberd cut through the sky, and the vast and irresistible power poured down without any scruples. The unique technique of the Wang family of Beihai. The tribulation of 1,000 years. This was the move known as the extreme force. In an instant, the pure power pushed the explosive power to the peak, and the destructive power had no end. This was the move that was most suitable for Di Jiang. The sky halberd danced crazily, and the silver light turned from the waterfall to the river, to the sea, surging endlessly. The tribulation of 1,000 years. 1,000 strikes were all chopped down in the shortest time, and each strike was heavier than the previous one. The sound of weapons colliding suddenly echoed in the sky, suppressing the thunder. In front of Saint, there was all the sword light. But the sword light began to shake violently under the impact of the silver light. The sword light was on the verge of collapse, and the light was getting dimmer. The light was shrinking extremely, getting dimmer and dimmer. Only the silver sea in the sky was still mighty, getting crazier and crazier. Crack! The long sword in Saint's hand instantly exploded under the silver light. The tribulation of 1,000 years was just half over, and the dim sword light was almost completely extinguished in an instant. Saint's whole body was submerged in the silver light, shaking violently. The moment the sword light died, the sword intent was born. The sword energy and the sword intent rose at the same time. The extinguished sword light broke through the suppression of the silver light and began to expand to the limit. It was like a rebirth in the fire. There was no sword in Saint's hand, but the bright sword light suddenly shone to the extreme. "It's you?" Dijiang's tone showed a trace of disbelief for the first time, and he was so shocked that he was almost at a loss. The tribulation of 1,000 years fell crazily. The silver light crisscrossed the sky, one after another, but the reignited sword light was still stable. Saint was retreating, but the visible light was never extinguished. The tribulation of 1,000 years was almost over in an instant. Dijiang's figure stepped back a few steps, looked at Saint, and laughed. "I didn't expect it to be you. According to the seniority, I should call you nice, but do you deserve it?" "Ha, you are really a big shot. You are willing to be a running dog? Saint? Do you deserve it? Do you deserve it?" Saint's eyes were cold and he did not move. "You are old." Dijiang took a step forward and said indifferently, "Today I must take Li Tianlan away. Similarly, you should also come with me to Mount Dibbing as a guest." He raised the sky halberd in his hand. But as soon as he took a step forward, his face suddenly changed. In the night sky that was neither too far nor too near, an extremely swift and fierce killing intent instantly pierced through the air, getting closer and closer. Between heaven and earth, there was a crazy killing intent everywhere. Dijiang's face changed, and under the stimulation of the killing intent, he was uncertain. "Why don't you do it? I am still waiting to go with you to Mount Dibbing as a guest." Saint finally spoke in a sarcastic tone. Dijiang snorted coldly, glanced at Saint with killing intent, and then looked at Li Tianlan. He held the human emperor in his hand, and without hesitation, he turned around and left. He did not know who was approaching the battlefield, but he was sure that this person was not weaker than Saint. He was not weaker than the real Saint. Saint hesitated for a moment, and let Dijiang disappear with the human emperor. He turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. Dijiang did not look back, but rushed through the battlefield, rushed through the desert, and kept retreating. The distance of a few kilometers was instantly left behind by him. His rushing figure suddenly stopped, and his face was strange. In front of him was still a dense forest. But in the forest at night, in silence, there was a perfect and dreamy figure standing quietly under the tree. Beside her stood a man in black. He did not say a word, but his whole body was filled with battle intent. At this moment, Dijiang subconsciously ignored the great enemy beside the woman. All he could see was a pair of eyes as bright as the Milky Way. Under the night, Qin Weibai stood quietly, with military counselor beside her. The night wind blew her long hair, and her eyebrows were picturesque. Chapter 236. The darkness was as deep as a curtain. Dijiang's figure cut through the night and went away quickly with the whistling wind. The silver light was getting farther and farther away, but the sharp killing intent in the distant sky was getting closer and closer. The killing intent wasn't manic or arrogant, but it filled the whole space with extreme coldness. It was calm, indifferent, and extremely dangerous. Li Tianlan had fainted. Saint felt his pulse and heartbeat and was slightly relieved. The number 6 theater of operations that East Island divided was neither too big nor too small. But in 2 days, Saint couldn't find Li Tianlan. It was partly because of the size of the number 6 theater of operations, and partly because Li Tianlan was too fast. There was no nonsense in a high-intensity battle. Fight, fight, life and death, retreat. Li Tianlan's every move was clean and neat, and Saint was often 1 step slower than him. At first, it was like this. But through some remaining clues, Saint could gradually see that Li Tianlan's strength had broken through to a rather terrifying level. Then he wasn't in a hurry and kept following him unhurriedly. But he didn't expect that Li Tianlan would meet Dijiang at the end of the battle. If he came 1 step later, Saint didn't dare to think about the consequences. But even so, he still let Dijiang take away the valuable human emperor. At this moment, looking at Li Tianlan who was in a coma, Saint suddenly felt a little embarrassed. The crazy killing intent in the air suddenly stopped at a moment. The night sky suddenly became clear. The killing intent all over the battlefield silently turned into an almost completely transparent shadow. The shadow fluctuated violently in the night, and then turned into a black shadow. The killing intent had completely disappeared. The place where the black shadow stood was a void. Saint furrowed his brows as if he was thinking about something. "How is it?" Tribulation, who rushed to the battlefield, asked in a hoarse voice. He and Saint were both dressed in black, but their temperaments were completely different. Saint's inadvertent every move seemed to have a torrential sword chi, but the Tribulation was silent. Everywhere it passed, there was only mystery and endless darkness. "He's seriously injured and too tired." Saint picked up Li Tianlan and handed him to Tribulation. After a moment of silence, he continued, "The human emperor is lost." Tribulation uttered a simple syllable. "It's Jiang Hongwei. You came a step too late. Otherwise, you might have been able to keep him here." Saint sighed regretfully, but there was an inexplicable brilliance flickering in his eyes. He recalled the moment of the fight and the lightning that pierced through the sky. He laughed at himself and thought that Yi Futian was indeed a terrifying junior. The double thunder veins of the Wang family of Beihai? Tribulation's tone was calm. "I can't do it myself, but I have you guys. Anyway, the distance is not far. I can't reason with him, but the three of us can't reason with him. That little fellow is a smart person. He's very sensible." Military counselor glanced at Saint with a smile and continued, "You don't have to worry about your identity." Saint seemed to understand something and then he frowned. His eyes changed and he winked at military counselor. Military counselor nodded knowingly and turned to leave. "I know Saint's identity. What about you? Or you?" Feeling Li Tianlan's breathing getting steadier and steadier, Tribulation looked at military counselor's back and suddenly asked. Military counselor's figure paused, and then he hurried into the darkness again, as if he was in a hurry. His voice drifted through the night sky and was clear to everyone's ears. "I am military counselor. I am also the hand that holds the saber in samsara." His figure disappeared, and he seemed to be in a hurry. Tribulation's pupils suddenly condensed. He silently looked at the direction where military counselor left. After a long time, he turned to look at military counselor and said in a low voice, "Does the saber really exist?" "Saber. Invisible saber. A saber that was hard to be perceived. In Zhongzhou state, only a few people could perceive the existence of this saber, but it was vague. Not to mention Tribulation, even Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun didn't know what the so-called saber was." "Of course it exists," Saint said blandly, "but not for a long time." Tribulation took a deep breath, looked at Saint seriously and asked, "Military counselor is the hand that holds the saber, then who is the saber holder? Is it the master of Samsara Palace? He used to be the boss." Saint hesitated, but still told the truth. "When Tianlan returns, it will be Tianlan who holds the saber. He may never imagine what kind of saber the boss left for him in Zhongzhou state. I can't imagine it either." Tribulation's tone was as calm as water. "It seems that Boss Qin has made up her mind. The gift she left is indeed valuable, but it may not be what Tianlan wants. But it's what he needs most. Because he is in Zhongzhou state." Saint's tone was indifferent. Tribulation stopped talking. He had never been good at emotional affairs. There was always a choice between sensibility and rationality. Qin Weibai made a choice. "What about Li Tianlan?" He looked at Li Tianlan, who was still in a coma, and said with a self-mocking smile, "I didn't expect the legendary saber to really exist. So what have the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City been doing for so many years? What's the point of what they have done?" Saint didn't speak, just turned around silently and said blandly, "Let's go. There's still something to do." Tribulation didn't say more. He held Li Tianlan and disappeared instantly. On the other side of the battlefield, military counselor's figure was rushing through the forest, without any reserve of strength. Trees flashed behind him. Suddenly, his figure suddenly stopped where it was. The stifling heat was brewing in the mountain forest, bringing with it a despairing silence. Military counselor's figures slowly moved forward, one step after another. His body stopped under a big tree. Military counselor was silent, but his eyes suddenly became extremely crazy and fierce. It was the place where he and the boss separated. Before they separated, the boss was resting under the tree. But now, the tree was still, the boss was gone. Zhongzhou State. The white mist in Mount Qingyun still hadn't dissipated. The white mist enveloped every corner of the mountain, and it was so thick that it couldn't be dispersed. The white mist flowed clearly and slowly in the night. Great Master Wei, the most famous metaphysics grandmaster in Zhongzhou State, stood quietly in front of the gate of the temple. He lowered his head with a smile on his face and looked at the flourishing flowers in front of the temple gate. Large patches of flowers had now completely covered all the roads in the temple. The ancient temple, the white mist, and the flourishing flowers were everything. A drop of red blood flowed down from Great Master Wu's chest and dripped into the flowers. The old monk, whose white hair had completely disappeared, suddenly touched his bald head and looked at the night sky. The sky was still filled with white mist, and it was as ethereal as a fairyland. Drops of water were falling from the sky, penetrating the white mist and moistening the flowers and plants. "It's raining," he murmured softly, opened his mouth, but closed it again. The master was going to ask his two disciples to enjoy the rain together, but when the words came to his mouth, he remembered that his two disciples, Ruzhen and Rui, had been arranged to go to East Island by him. He sighed softly, turned around, and walked slowly into the gate of the temple. Another drop of blood flowed down from his chest. The drop of blood fell to the ground and splashed. The rain was getting heavier. Changdao International Airport. Two middle-aged monks with the same appearance, figure, and temperament slowly walked out of the hall. Both of them were dressed in simple monk robes, and their expressions were peaceful and quiet. The two monks who had been walking side by side came out of the hall in silence. They looked at each other and turned around without saying a word. One went to the east and the other went to the west. They went further and further away. The dull night sky suddenly rumbled with muffled thunder. The dense lightning cut through the night sky before the thunder, falling from above. In an instant, the heavy rain fell on Changdao with thunder and lightning and strong wind. The stuffy heat of Changdao faded away. The overwhelming torrential rain suppressed everything. Chapter 237. Li Tianlan abruptly woke up from his coma. The countless fights in the past 2 days had long exceeded his physical endurance. The so-called coma was extremely noisy for him. The light and shadow of the fire and lightning were flashing, the weapons were colliding, the crowd was roaring and screaming, and the dense sound of explosions was heard. Chaos. Absolute chaos. All the fighting scenes in the past 2 days seemed to have happened at the same time. It was oppressive and suffocating, and the chaos made people crazy. Li Tianlan woke up in the countless flashing scenes. He opened his eyes. It was silent all around. All the scenes began to disappear with his consciousness, but there was an indescribable palpitation suddenly breaking out in the depths of his heart. He was baffled, but his body was trembling and he was short of breath, as if he had lost the most valuable thing. What on earth was it? Awake! A low, hoarse voice suddenly sounded. It was very cold but with a little soft tone. Yes. Li Tianlan responded in a low voice, still feeling the tension and palpitation brought by the crazy beating of his heart. After a while, he managed to calm down and realized that he was still on Tribulation's back. Tribulation's shoulders were not broad, but they were very stable. The thick night kept retreating as he moved forward. At this time, the two of them had left the forest and were walking quickly in a remote mountain area. "Marshal uncle, I can get down." Li Tianlan moved on Tribulation's back. He was still extremely tired, but his injury had barely stabilized. The so-called stabilization meant that the injury did not continue to deepen, and some strength began to slowly recover. He exerted a little strength and directly jumped off Tribulation's back. As soon as his feet landed on the ground, his figure staggered. He took a deep breath and slowly stood firm. "How are you?" "Not bad," Li Tianlan said. he subconsciously glanced around and asked, "Where are we?" "Less than 15 kilometers from the place of the final battle." Tribulation's tone was calm and sharp. But as he spoke, Li Tianlan was surprised to find that his aura suddenly began to change. In the blink of an eye, Tribulation's figure seemed to have disappeared in the void and turned into nothingness. This change, it was not because Tribulation was too strong. On the contrary, it was because Tribulation suddenly became weak. Although Li Tianlan was seriously injured now, his realm had reached the half-step thundershocking realm. His absolutely abundant willpower was enough for him to exert great destructive power even when he only had a little power. In his extremely keen perception, he could clearly sense that Tribulation's aura was constantly retreating. Right now, Tribulation was like an ant in his perception. An ant that was completely ignored. "Martial uncle, your condition?" Li Tianlan's face suddenly changed. "I'm fine." Tribulation shook his head. As he spoke, his aura became strong again, and then weak again. The sharp and cold killing intent changed several times, and finally became completely silent. "Are you hurt? What happened?" Li Tianlan's frown deepened. Judging from Tribulation's current state, it was clear that he was seriously injured to the extreme. He couldn't even control his breath at all. If his injury got worse, his combat capability would almost be completely destroyed. "Don't worry. This is a necessary adjustment, not an injury." Tribulation snorted and took a deep breath. "Let's hurry up and get there." Li Tianlan took a deep look at him. When he was about to speak, Tribulation had already started to move. He didn't slow down, but the deathly still aura on him was getting weaker and weaker. Li Tianlan followed him forward. After a long silence, he suddenly asked, "Martial uncle, what's the situation now?" Tribulation stopped moving forward. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "Not good. We're too slow or they're too fast. The battle started the day your traces were exposed, but it's still a little late. We're making a big move in East Island now, and all the dark superpowers have started to take action. The situation is just as we predicted. The whole world is attacking East Island. The current situation in Changdao is pretty good." Then, Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows in surprise. "But a large part of the special warfare elites of East Island trapped in Huading have begun to return. Although the power of East Island and Changdao is in danger, they can always hold on. But we don't have enough time." Tribulation's tone was clear and gloomy. Li Tianlan's face changed, and he couldn't say anything for a while. The situation in East Island was good. But Huading was in chaos. But the problem was that Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, and the Master of Samsara Palace, the three superiors of the Invincible Realm at the top of the divine list, were in Huading. How could Huading be in chaos? When Huading was in chaos, a large number of East Island elites trapped in Huading took the opportunity to break out and return to Changdao. This was definitely a disaster for the elites of Zhongzhou State in Changdao. This time, Zhongzhou State conspired against East Island because two Invincible Realm experts and countless elites of East Island were trapped in Huading. The special warfare force inside East Island was empty, so Zhongzhou State took the opportunity to attack. How strong were the forces trapped in Huading? Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, and the Master of Samsara Palace were in Huading in person. Once these people returned to East Island, the strength of East Island would even be invincible. After all, this was their home field. What the hell is going on? Li Tianlan's tone was solemn. The chaos started at the border. Annan State played a rebellion. Nominally, all the troops in the north were transferred to the south. But in fact, hey, the five superpowers united with the mysterious armed forces in Annan State and invaded the border of Zhongzhou State, trying to destroy the Blood Battalion. They made a big move. This time, Arcis, the Saint War Angel of the Vatican, led the army with a murderous weapon. Wang Tianzong went to the border to suppress them with the Human Emperor. And the Master of Samsara Palace. She was seriously injured and couldn't do anything. Gu Xingyun could only mobilize the third batch of elites who entered Changdao to guard Huading. The elites of East Island in Huading took the opportunity to break out. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, but a considerable number of East Island elites took the opportunity to run away, including the two superiors of the invincible realm in East Island. Li Tianlan's heart sank. Somehow, he suddenly thought of the star flag in the camp where the Li family was. He asked subconsciously, "How about the border?" "The border?" Tribulation glanced at him and said, "Senior Li did it himself. Besides, it said that there's a mysterious superior helping them. There should still be a fight at the border." Wang Tianzong and the mysterious superior returned to Huading as soon as Senior Li showed up, but they didn't have time. East Island took advantage of the time difference. When they returned, everything was almost settled. "This?" Li Tianlan opened his mouth and couldn't say anything for a while. He always felt that there was something wrong with this matter, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. After thinking about it, he said in a cautious tone, "The other party seems to have grasped the timing very well. Someone betrayed the country and tipped them off. Of course, they grasped the timing very well." Tribulation said lightly, "It's not just a matter of tipping off. The traitor even changed the code of the arsenal of the Border Control Corps. One after another, it finally changed the situation greatly. Now, everyone is in a difficult situation." Li Tianlan felt cold all over. This general trend that swept the whole dark world was a big picture. Whether it was in the light or in the dark, it involved too many things. Zhongzhou State, East Island, Samsara Palace, the 5 dark forces, Anan State, the traitor hiding in the dark, and the mysterious force that cooperated with Samsara Palace. The battlefield also spread from Asia to Europe and America. A slight change in one part could affect the whole body. The situation changed from advantage to disadvantage, and it kept changing. All the major forces, down to every single person, seemed to have become a densely packed chess piece. And the general trend was the chessboard. On the turbulent chessboard, behind the darkness, there seemed to be a black hand quietly pushing all this, completely connecting all the coincidences and accidents together, and finally pushing the chess pieces on the chessboard to achieve the result he wanted. Yes. There was only this black hand. It quietly used Zhongzhou State, East Island, all the dark forces, hundreds of thousands of troops, countless superiors, and everything was under the control of the other party. If that was really the case, how much courage did he have to have? How much effort did it take? Who was the other party? What did he want to do? Li Tianlan was silent, but the intuition in his heart was getting clearer and clearer. Everything he thought was intuition. Without evidence, it was hard to even say that the speculation was accurate. It was just intuition. But he believed it without a doubt. He glanced at Tribulation, and suddenly thought of Zhongzhou State, all the superiors, and a lot of things. One person, one force, one country. They were all players on the chessboard, and they were also chess pieces. But the black hand was secretly pushing the situation on the chessboard, and it even had the ability to overturn the chessboard at any time. What was more frightening was that so far, everyone was still in a state of confusion. Zhongzhou State seemed to have realized something, but it couldn't resist it. At least for now, Zhongzhou State had no choice. What they needed to do most was to completely destroy the current power of Changdao before those East Island elites came back from Huading. Now Zhongzhou State was not only fighting for victory, but also for time. And Tribulation seemed to know this, so he restrained all his aura and put himself in a state close to nirvana. In such a state, if he wasn't seriously injured, there was only one possibility. Tribulation. When Zhongzhou State needed power the most. He was about to break through. "Martial uncle, do you think the master of Samsara Palace is seriously injured to the point that she can't fight?" In the silence, Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Tribulation looked back at once. Chapter 238. Intentionally or unintentionally, Li Tianlan asked a seemingly ordinary but actually extremely sensitive question. A vague question. A clear answer. Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan quietly, his eyes shining and sharp. Li Tianlan just walked forward quietly, as if he was thinking or hesitating. "It was Di Jiang, the first disciple of Wang Tianzong, who attacked you just now. It was Saint who saved you." After a long silence, Tribulation said calmly, "What are you suspecting?" "Nothing. Li Tianlan shook his head and looked at Tribulation. Actually, I saw it. At that time, I was not completely unconscious. I saw Saint's sword. You didn't expect it, did you? Tribulation suddenly smiled. I really didn't expect it. Li Tianlan nodded. I didn't expect it to be him. How could it be him? He had never seen Saint's sword before, but the sword intent was so dazzling that Li Tianlan had already confirmed Saint's identity when the sword energy and nirvana sword intent broke out. Saint's reputation, like his sword intent, was well known in the dark world. Such a person was willing to be the first supermaster of samsara. Although the identity of the first supermaster was transcendent enough, it was not as free as controlling a force by himself. This matter, Tribulation thought for a while and continued with a smile, this is samsara's own internal affairs. If you are interested, you might as well ask Saint himself in the future. Boss Qin probably knows something about it. The dark world is a game of chess. Every big shot is playing, and there is no retreat. Since you can't quit, it's good to make more preparations. Li Tianlan fell silent and said no more. He knew very well that on the chessboard of the dark world, the parties involved in the game could quit. The Li family was the representative of quitting in the middle of the game. Naturally, the result was terrible. Who is the master of Samsara Palace? Li Tianlan murmured to himself. You don't believe her. I can feel that you are even guarding against her. Tribulation said. There was no extra emotion in his tone, as if he was simply stating a fact. How can I believe her when I don't even know her true identity? In samsara, I only believe her. There was no need to ask who he was referring to. Martial uncle, have you heard of the name Dongqing Huangtu? Li Tianlan asked, looking straight ahead. At the end of his line of sight was a slightly higher hillside. There was light coming from behind the hillside, but because it was very far away, the light was a little blurry. Dongqing Huangtu? Were they from the Dongqing clan? Never heard of it. Tribulation was stunned for a moment and shook his head. Who is this man? Li Tianlan smiled and said calmly, I also want to know. Dongqing Huangtu. From all aspects, this person seemed to be someone who did not exist. But Li Tianlan had firmly believed that this person did exist, or had existed before. Zhuang Huayang had never heard of this name. Tribulation had never heard of this name. Li Baidian, Ning Qianqing, and even Dongqing Qiuqi and Dongqing Yueshan from the Dongqing clan had never heard of this name. These were just a few people, but they were enough to encompass 3 eras. Dongqing Hongguang also said he didn't know. But Li Tianlan knew very well that the old master of the Dongqing clan did not tell him the truth. At first, Li Tianlan was just curious about the name. But as things developed, especially the unusual behavior of Samsara Palace, he felt the importance of the name more and more. Samsara Palace must have something to do with Dongqing Huangtu. The master of Samsara Palace now seemed to be helping the Li family, but behind all kinds of things, who could be sure that she was helping the Li family? Or was she helping the hidden heavenly son behind everyone's eyes? Most importantly, in his repressed memory, he seemed to have heard his grandfather mention this name. The Li family, the Dongqing clan, and the Samsara Palace. Vaguely, there seemed to be a line that connected the 3 superpowers together. And the name Dongqing Huangtu was the key of the key. If he could figure out this key, he could basically figure out what role Samsara played in the plot of Zhongzhou State, and even the final outcome of the final battle of Changdao. Was the black hand that was pushing the chessboard in his intuition the Samsara Palace? If it was the Samsara Palace, then what was Qin Weibai, who could represent the will of the master of Samsara Palace most of the time, doing? Li Tianlan did not dare to think about this question, nor did he want to think about it. What are you thinking about? Tribulation's deep voice suddenly sounded. Nothing. Li Tianlan came to his senses and said softly with emotion, I just feel that I'm not strong enough. If I'm strong enough, I can use my absolute strength to lift up all the fog in front of me and shatter everything. If he was strong enough, at your age, your achievements are enough to scare a lot of people. And you are recultivating. Although your current state is supported by drugs, if you were in your heyday, you would be one of the forces that could decide the outcome of the battle. Even if you met Di Jiang, the first disciple of Wang Tianzong, you would still be able to fight back. Tianlan, you will enter the invincible realm sooner or later, you want. Tribulation rarely talked so much, but this time, he was suddenly interrupted by Li Tianlan before he finished. Invincible realm? Martial uncle, do you know when the concept of invincible realm was first put forward? Tribulation suddenly fell silent, as if he was thinking and hesitating. It's not a secret. Li Tianlan answered his own question. Invincible realm can be said to be the peak of martial arts in the past 500 years, and martial arts was officially divided into realms for the first time. According to records, the first invincible realm expert in 500 years was not from Zhongzhou State, but from Star State. He was the god of war of Star State more than 400 years ago. He was also the one who formally put forward the concept of 4 realms of martial arts and invincible realm, and it prevailed in the whole dark world. Tribulation was still silent. At this moment, he seemed to know what Li Tianlan wanted to say, but he was a little uncertain. 4 realms of martial arts. Invincible realm. In the end, it's just a concept. Or rather, it was just a path. How vast is martial arts? How can a road be completely summarized? The reason why the cultivation of 4 realms of martial arts prevailed in the dark world is that it can improve people's combat effectiveness faster and clarify their goals. In the journey of martial arts exploration, a clear goal means enough motivation. If there is no 4 realms of martial arts, then when a person reaches the peak of ice condensing realm, he will not know the next realm is fire flaming realm. Without a goal, how can he cultivate? Such a concept is good, but it's not without disadvantages. Li Tianlan paused, glanced at Tribulation and continued, for example, martial uncle, you only cultivate the chi-controlling realm, but now you are the top superior of the half-step invincible realm, and even have the combat capability of the invincible realm. This is enough to show that the concept of 4 realms of martial arts is not perfect. At the very least, the critical point of breaking through to the ice-condensing realm in the chi-controlling realm is not the real limit of the chi-controlling realm. He is just a goal. If you don't look at this goal and continue to walk in the chi-controlling realm, you can still be invincible. Tribulation finally opened his mouth and said flatly, the concept of martial arts has never been perfect. Indeed. Li Tianlan smiled and said, so I have been thinking about a question since I was very young. For 500 years, the ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai can be said to be the only heavenly son. Although the founder of Xuanyuantai didn't have the title of heavenly son, he also had the combat capability of the heavenly son. If they were born in this era, who would be stronger between them and today's so-called superior of the invincible realm? Tribulation finally confirmed his inner guess and chuckled. You already have the answer, right? Yes. Li Tianlan also laughed. In the night, his laughter was not loud, but his whole person bloomed with a kind of inexplicable brilliance. The invincible realm is the peak of martial arts today. But maybe many people forget that the first invincible realm expert in history is actually a shame. There is a clear record of this in the map of God of War of Xuanyuantai. About 30 years after the death of the ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai, the founder of Xuanyuantai also reached his old age. The first superior of the invincible realm in history, the god of war of Star State, was also born in this background. He put forward the concept of the 4 realms of martial arts. After he reached the advanced level of martial arts, he went east to Zhongzhou State and challenged the founder of Xuanyuantai who never knew what the 4 realms of martial arts were. In Li Tianlan's calm words, Tribulation's breathing unconsciously became rapid. This kind of emotion, it was like excitement. The founder of Xuanyuantai accepted the challenge. Tribulation said, although this matter was recorded in the map of God of War, it was not a top secret for the whole dark world. It was just that few people knew it. Li Tianlan smiled and said, in the battle in the past, in the face-to-face confrontation, the founder only used 1 sword move. That was definitely the most amazing sword move in hundreds of years. The magnificence of that sword move really shone through the ages. Even today, 500 years later, it was not inferior at all. Tribulation's eyes were full of fascination. He knew the result after that sword move. Back then, the so-called god of war of Star State, the first superior of the invincible realm, was directly smashed into blood mist under that sword move before he had time to make a move. The invincible realm. Who was the real invincible realm? I have only recently figured out a truth. The invincible realm is just the goal. Martial arts is just the foundation. The 4 realms of martial arts are just a path, just a path. The invincible realm is a realm. But the invincible realm is not. Li Tianlan said softly. The residential area on the verge of demolition was as quiet as a ghost town in the night. The heavy rain spread from the east. The sound of the rain shrouded the field, and the rain gradually swept to the battlefield. The thunder in the sky kept rolling. The heavy rain was majestic. A pale bolt of lightning streaked across the sky without a sound. The residential area shrouded in darkness was abruptly illuminated for a moment. Against the pale background of the whole world, the figure, which was originally integrated with the night and the void, suddenly became extremely eye-catching. In the heavy rain, the black shadow appeared in front of the dilapidated corridor. A white dress involuntarily followed the black shadow and landed on the ground. The white dress fluttered in the wind and rain at night like a fairy. She stood quietly behind the black shadow. There was no extra expression on her perfect dreamy face, but her bright eyes flashed with clear and sharp light. In the night rain, even standing behind someone, she still had a kind of peerless aura, calm and calm. I like the rain. The vague black shadow suddenly spoke with a soft voice, sounding ethereal and elegant. Because the rain can eliminate all traces. It is not good for tracking but good for stealth. Qin Weibai tilted her head. Her bright eyes looked at the heavy rain in the sky in the blink of an eye. Her red lips raised slightly, revealing a cold and mocking smile. Are you afraid? Now I am really afraid. There was a smile in the black shadow's tone. After all, for me, tonight is an unexpected gain, but it's not a big deal. In 2 days, I will send you to where you should go. When you become my second sister-in-law, you and my second brother's children will call me third uncle. What should I be afraid of? Qin Weibai was silent. Even though the atmosphere wasn't very friendly, there wasn't the slightest hint of panic on her face, only indifference. It was an exquisite, dazzling, dreamy face. It was sharp, cold, and had a soul-stirring charm. Do you deserve it? Qin Weibai finally spoke, but her tone was simple. Whether I deserve it or not, when my second sister-in-law comes home, you will know. Even if you don't want to, so what? My second brother has been dreaming of you. If you marry into our family, I don't think he will mind using force on a weak woman like you. It may become more interesting this way. The black shadow said with a smile. You have to wait until your second brother can come back alive from Zhongzhou State. Qin Weibai sneered. In the face of the only invincible realm killer in the dark world, her figure looked so weak and helpless, but her momentum was sharp to the extreme. The black shadow's laughter stopped. He was silent for a while, then said blandly, It seems that you know who I am? Xianxia, code name Evil, the top killer in the dark world, the third master of the Jiang family of South America. Your second brother is Jiang Chenyan, right? Is it hard to guess? Another muffled thunder rolled through the sky. Pale lightning fell immediately. In the flash of light and shadow, Qin Weibai clearly saw Evil's eyes narrow. The information of Samsara Palace is really unexpected. Evil stared at Qin Weibai in front of him and sighed softly. Qin Weibai glanced at him, said nothing, and walked directly. She never thought of running away, which was tantamount to asking for humiliation. When military counselor sent Human Emperor to Li Tianlan, and Evil appeared for the first time, she had already known that at this time, the word running away had become a joke. She walked directly into the corridor, and without looking back, she asked, Which floor? There was a flash of brilliance in Evil's eyes. No wonder his second brother was so infatuated with her. At least from the time she was captured to the present, her performance was indeed generous and arrogant enough, which was completely different from ordinary women. It's on the first floor on the left, Evil said in a playful tone. Qin Weibai knocked on the door without saying anything. An ordinary-looking woman with an intoxicating charm gently pushed open the door. When she saw Qin Weibai standing at the door, she froze for a moment. Then she pursed her lips and chuckled softly. "Boss Qin, welcome. I'm Rose." She spoke softly and slightly opened her body. Qin Weibai walked into the room calmly. The condition of the residential area that was about to be demolished was naturally not very good. All the furniture had been half empty, and only a few candles were burning in the room. In the living room, there was a shabby tea table that could be treated as garbage, and there was a chessboard on the tea table. When Rose came to open the door, the other woman sitting on the other side of the chessboard did not move, but just stared at the chessboard in front of her. In the night rain, the two women seemed to be playing chess. "Make me a cup of tea." Qin Weibai naturally sat on the opposite side of the chessboard and ordered indifferently. Rose was a little stunned. And the woman sitting motionless in front of the chessboard also seemed to be stunned, and narrowed her eyes to look at Qin Weibai. "You go." Qin Weibai did not look at Rose, but at the woman in front of her with a kind of arrogance, and ordered coldly. "Yuehua, why don't you go and make tea for second madam?" Evil came in from behind and ordered coldly. Yuehua snorted coldly, stared at Qin Weibai, and stood up reluctantly. "The place is a little shabby, so I have to trouble you. When you come to South America, the Jiang family will do its best to entertain you." Evil sat on the opposite side of Qin Weibai, looked at the chessboard in front of him, and said with a smile, "I still say the same thing. Jiang Qianyan doesn't deserve me, and neither does the Jiang family of South America. I can go back with you, but if you are willing to stay here with me and waste time, I'm afraid the Jiang family of South America will be wiped out in the Battle of Changdao." "The Battle of Changdao?" Evil suddenly laughed, squinted at Qin Weibai, and said softly, "What is that?" Only a few other idiotic forces wanted to get a share of the benefits. The goal of the Jiang family of South America has never been the Battle of Changdao, nor East Island. Chapter 239. Outside the window, it was raining cats and dogs. The rumbling rain shook every corner of Changdao. The candlelight in the apartment without power was swaying slightly. The soft and tiny halo spread out and illuminated the chessboard, but the whole living room looked darker and darker outside the halo. Evil's soft and almost cold voice rang across Qin Weibai. It was very close, but it seemed to pass through the wind and rain and the halo of the candlelight. Between the lines, there was a kind of unspeakable weirdness and ghastly feeling. The old apartment was not big, but its force was quite strong. Evil, Moonlight, and Rose, even the weakest among them, Rose was a superior close to the half-step invincible realm. Such a lineup was strong to outsiders, but for Qin Weibai, who was a captive, it was the biggest crisis. Qin Weibai was still as calm as water. That was a kind of coldness and calmness that came from inside out. She slowly gathered her white skirt, looked at the unfinished chess pieces in front of her, and said softly, "Are you thinking about Samsara Palace? That's our main purpose this time." At this point, Evil thought he had everything under control, so his words became very calm. "The final battle of Changdao is nothing. Even if we win in the end and get the right to speak in the special warfare system of East Island, so what? Not only will we disperse our forces, but we also have to guard against Zhongzhou state and even fight with the royal family. I don't deny the huge benefits, but there are also a lot of troubles. It will take at least many years to digest all this. The Jiang family of South America has no patience and is not interested in these things." Qin Weibai looked at him strangely. Her eyes flickered, and she said thoughtfully, "Do you think it will be easier to deal with Samsara Palace than to occupy Changdao?" "It's not easy. But now it's different." Evil's cold laughter echoed in the living room. He casually grabbed a chess piece and played with it in his hand. He said in a playful tone, "Samsara Palace is the fastest growing force in recent years. In the past, the Jiang family of South America naturally wouldn't want to provoke it easily. But now there's a variable." The chess piece rubbed in his hand and made a sharp sound, but Evil's tone was getting calmer and calmer. "To be honest, I didn't expect Boss Qin to show up in Changdao. This is really a surprise. Our first target was Li Tianlan. Her Highness the Palace Master and Boss Qin both care about that non-entity. As long as we bring him back, we won't have to worry about dealing with your samsara. I didn't expect that Boss Qin cared about him so much that he even came to Changdao in person. He stood up and waved his hand in the shadows, but his eyes flashed with a fiery light. It was the excitement of seeing great benefits and beautiful prospects. President Qin, I'm curious. How arrogant can you be when you view all men as dirt? In the eyes of countless people, you are an otherworldly fairy. Why would you fall for a nonentity like Li Tianlun? Look, what a good opportunity this is. I've caught you now. If I catch Li Tianlun, do you still have room to resist? He sat back down and sneered, so what if second brother doesn't deserve you? As long as Li Tianlun falls into our hands, as long as you still care, then you have no choice. At that time, in order to let the man you love live a little better, you might even take the initiative to climb into second brother's bed. Qin Weibai chuckled. Under the illumination of the candlelight, her exquisite, dreamy face carried a kind of dazzling holiness and coldness in the subtle light. Do you still want to say? She looked at Evil and said calmly, when the Jiang family of South America gets me, then use Tianlun to threaten me to deal with Samsara Palace? I haven't been in Samsara for a long time, but I can still influence some of the 12 Supermasters. If Samsara Palace loses the 12 Supermasters, will you attack the whole Samsara Palace by following the clues? What? It won't take too long. My sister is still seriously injured. Maybe during her recovery, the Jiang family of South America will do all this. At that time, my sister will be all alone, and at most, she will only have some defeated soldiers by her side. And your Jiang family of South America, with 3 brothers in the invincible realm and murderous weapons in hand, won't be afraid of my sister's revenge at all. Is that right? Evil rubbed the chess piece in his hand quietly and didn't say anything. Qin Weibai continued, and because I'm in your hands, my sister will be afraid to take action, so it's hard for her to take revenge at all costs. At that time, you will force me to agree to marry Jiang Chenyan, and naturally invite my sister to join the Jiang family of South America, giving her a position that can even be on an equal footing with your elder brother. It may take a long time to turn enemies into allies, so as to swallow Samsara Palace, but it's worth it, right? Boss Qin is really smart. Evil said indifferently. He was not surprised that Qin Weibai could think of this. When the will of the master of Samsara Palace was silent, Qin Weibai was the spokesperson of Samsara Palace. Even if such a person didn't know martial arts, no one dared to doubt her mind. And if she wasn't smart, she wouldn't have made a big plan to destroy the powerful Night Spirit a few months ago. In that battle, in addition to the absolute strength of the master of Samsara Palace, Qin Weibai's long-term arrangement behind the scenes was also indispensable. The plan is okay. Qin Weibai nodded and commented, it's not brilliant, but it grasps the weakness of Samsara Palace. No wonder you take it for granted. Take it for granted? Evil raised his eyebrows, and his tone was a little gloomy. In other words, it's a pipe dream. Qin Weibai said slowly. Footsteps sounded on the other side of the living room. Moonlight, who was extremely beautiful in black, came over with a cup of tea. She put the tea beside Qin Weibai gently, but her tone was a little meaningful. Second madam, please have some tea. Qin Weibai finally frowned, and there was a hint of annoyance between her eyebrows. It seemed that she was extremely unhappy with the title, Second Madam. Swish! She picked up the teacup and directly raised her hand without saying a word. The whole cup of tea, together with the teacup, suddenly flew toward Moonlight. However, her action was too obvious, and her strength was too delicate. Before the tea touched Moonlight's body, Moonlight moved her fingers slightly, and a subtle electric arc flashed. The tea was suddenly completely evaporated, and the teacup also turned into powder, fluttering in the candlelight. Get out! Qin Weibai's tone was cold and even a little gloomy. She had always been calm, but for the first time, she showed a little strength, which was extremely dazzling. She was a captive, but in the face of the 3 masters at this moment, Qin Weibai was more like a master. Moonlight's eyes narrowed, and her killing intent surged. She did not step back. Second sister-in-law, Moonlight is not a servant. She is one of the visiting professors of the Jiang family of South America, and also my second brother's favorite concubine. If you sisters don't unite and get along, you will be spanked in the future, ha. Evil laughed presumptuously and winked at Yu Hua. Moonlight retreated with a cold face. Qin Weibai was also smiling. Her smile was beautiful, like a blooming flower. However, everyone could feel the coldness and anger behind her smile. Remember what you said. Qin Weibai's tone was calm, not ostentatious, not sharp, more like an irresistible judgment. No one dares to talk to me like this. You will pay the price, and so will the Jiang family of South America. Second sister-in-law, you are so domineering. Evil sneered with a fake smile. But here, you'd better accept your fate. My fate is in my own hands. Qin Weibai's eyes were shining, but behind the brilliance was indifference. In your hands? Evil sneered. If it's really in your hands, why are you here? Because I need to be here, so I was caught by you. Qin Weibai looked at Evil and sneered. Otherwise, what do you think it is? The general trend is like a chessboard. You are high above, and each of you thinks you are a chess player. I am different. I am willing to be a chess piece. When necessary, I want to be here, so I am here. No one can stop me. She picked up a chess piece, put it on the chessboard, and pointed at the place where she put it. Like this. I don't believe it. Evil was silent for a long time, and then said with a smile. He looked down at the chessboard, put down a chess piece, and said coldly, Second sister-in-law can't control the situation of this game, let alone the general trend. The result has been decided. What can you do? The result has not been decided. Even if I lose, at least, I can still. She suddenly reached out her hand and turned over the chessboard in front of Evil's astonished eyes. The black and white chess pieces flew up in the flickering candlelight and fell to the ground. The sound was as clear as the rainstorm outside the window. Qin Weibai leaned forward slightly. At that moment, Evil, who had entered the invincible realm, subconsciously shrank back. Qin Weibai stood up with a cold smile and said blandly, I am here, watching your plan. Tianlan is a variable, and I am the key. Do you really think you can catch Tianlan? You can kill him, but you will never catch him. Don't deny it. She said coldly, he is my man. Do you know my man better than I do? The anger in Evil's tone began to grow. He sat up straight and said in a deep voice, You really don't care about Li Tianlan's life or death? I do. Qin Weibai's tone was clear. Thunder rolled outside the window. Her voice was as cold as the pale lightning shining outside the window, without sadness or joy. Then let him die. Evil's body shook. It was incredible. Qin Weibai's eyes softened quietly. In fact, many people, even saint and military counselor, didn't know that she cooperated with the mysterious highness in East Island not to let the mysterious organization completely ensure Li Tianlan's safety. On the surface, a consortium was used as a bargaining chip, but in the dark, countless contributions were made. How could she just want Li Tianlan to be safe and sound? What she wanted was more after Li Tianlan's death. If a man didn't die once, how could he make a great breakthrough? The rain fell in every corner of Changdao. In the heavy rain that almost blinded people, a middle-aged monk in plain monk robes walked along the airport highway and came to a medium-sized villa area in the western suburbs of Changdao. The rain was heavy. The heavy rain fell from the sky, but it bounced off the air 5 or 6 meters away from the monk. He was still dry in the rain. He looked at the villa in front of him and walked directly to the gate. A black luxury car drove over from the gate and finally stopped in front of the monk. The bright car lights shone on the monk's face. The monk didn't move, just put his palms together and saluted. A handsome, almost enchanting man quickly got out of the car and came to the monk. In the rain, his cold voice seemed to soften a little. I'm Daybreak. Nice to meet you, master. The monk saluted again and said apologetically, I'm Rui. There was an accident, so I came a little late. Daybreak's expression changed. He pulled the monk into the car and asked with concern, How is Great Master Wu? Master, Rui said softly. He looked sad and said no more. Daybreak's heart sank, But he didn't say anything more. He changed the topic and said with a smile, "His Highness is waiting for you. You came later than scheduled, but it's okay." The car drove quickly in the rain and finally stopped in front of a villa in the center of the villa area. Along the way, the whole villa was silent, but it was brightly lit. Countless raindrops became clearer in the continuous lights. The whole villa area seemed to be suppressing something with the rain. Ru Yi observed silently without saying a word. Another enchanting man who looked slightly like Daybreak came over and opened the car door for Rui. He said with a smile, "Master, I'm Dawn. I'm Dawn, please." Rui nodded silently, touched the things in his arms, and walked to the villa. Dawn and Daybreak didn't go in. They stood in front of the door, looking at the rain in front of them, quietly waiting for the result of this quiet but very important meeting. Finally, Daybreak said softly in a complicated tone, "It's about time." Dawn looked at the brightly lit villa area in front of him and said in a low tone. He was silent for a while and then said softly, "Brother, do you think His Highness can get what he wants?" "How do I know?" Daybreak was silent for a while and finally shook his head. He knew what Dawn was talking about. After returning to Changdao from Ninghu, His Highness had been staying in this villa alone. He didn't eat or say a word. Their young master, who was dead. No one could imagine how sad and desperate His Highness was when he heard this news. It was just a few days' difference. If it was a few days later, their young master, the teenager named Huawu, would be born in the final battle. The name of the heavenly son, just a few days later. This time, Rui, the disciple of Great Master Wei, the metaphysics grandmaster of Zhongzhou State, came to Changdao, which was part of the plan. But now His Highness wanted to find out who killed Huawu. Great Master Wei might have the ability to give clues about this matter. But this was out of the plan. Was Great Master Wei really willing to help? If he really knew the murderer, would His Highness vent his anger on the enemy? Or would he focus on the final battle? After being silent for many years, there was no one in the world that His Highness couldn't defeat. His anger. Daybreak looked a little pale and didn't know what to say for a while. Great Master Wei gave us a name. It should be in line with the general trend. Brother, what do you think our organization will be called in the future? Dawn changed the topic and asked. Daybreak smiled and said slowly, "We'll know in a minute." It was quiet in the villa. The monk walked into the hall of the villa and saw the man sitting on the sofa for the first time. He didn't sit in the middle of the sofa, but in a corner. But the feeling he gave off was too real, so real that even though his appearance was not outstanding, he could still make people notice his existence at first glance. "Greetings, Your Highness." Rui took the initiative to pack his luggage with a calm expression. "Master Rui is too polite." The mysterious Highness's tone was calm and low. He didn't seem to be in a good mood. He glanced at Rui and said straightforwardly, "Have you brought it?" Rui nodded as usual, took out a letter from his arms, and handed it over respectfully. His Highness waved his hand, and the envelope fell directly into his hand. Without hesitation, he tore open the envelope. There was only a very simple piece of white paper in the envelope. 8 simple words were juxtaposed on the white paper. The rest were blank. The origin of the purgatory, God lives in heaven capital. Only these 8 words. His Highness looked at it silently and didn't speak for a long time. His question was not answered, and his invitation was not responded. No response was also a response. "Thank Great Master Wei for me," His Highness said slowly after a long silence. "I have one more thing to ask, Your Highness." Rui stood where he was and said softly, "Please go ahead." His Highness's eyes were still fixed on the 8 words on the paper, and his tone was calm. "I hope Your Highness can help a person." Rui's expression was calm. But His Highness's fingers holding the letter froze slightly. He slowly turned his head and looked at Rui in front of him. After a long time, he said indifferently, "How can I help him?" He didn't ask who that person was. He knew without asking. "Just like Your Highness did in those days, I hope Your Highness can help me." Rui's tone was dull, as plain as tasteless water, without any personal emotion. His Highness looked at the middle-aged monk in front of him quietly, and his eyes gradually became cold. It was not a direct anger, but more like a kind of anger. I also have one thing to ask, Master. He tapped the paper beside his hand and said softly, I want to know who killed Huawu. Rui was silent. They looked at each other for a while, and then Rui looked away and said calmly, there is an answer in the letter. There were only 8 words on the letter. The origin of the purgatory, God lives in heaven capital. There was nothing else. No answer was the answer. His Highness didn't seem to be smart, or he was extremely persistent. He stared straight at Rui, waved his hand, and the letter floated directly in front of Rui. The paper was suspended in the air, and the pages stretched straight in the air. I can't see the answer. He said, Master Rui, if you see it, please tell me. He said word by word, who on earth killed Huawu? Rui sighed softly, put his palms together, and said, since there is no answer, I can't say it. Why are you so persistent, Your Highness? Can't say it. Not can't say it. His Highness's eyes suddenly surged with a trace of fire, and he said in a deep voice, that's my son. Rui stopped talking and stood still, keeping the posture of putting his palms together, and was as silent as a statue. His Highness suddenly smiled. That smile was real and bright, but his eyes were full of indifference. Since you don't allow me, why should I help others? He looked at Rui and asked very seriously. In Rui's silence, he suddenly stood up and said angrily, why should I help others? Boundless sharp sword intent burst out around him in an instant. The sword intent swept through every space in the living room. Rui's monk robe was cut one after another, and his body was dripping with blood. Dense sword marks fell on the wall, and the whole living room was full of sword intent. That person has wind and thunder veins, that person wants to make great achievements, that person is called the Heavenly Son. What about Huawu? Does my son deserve to die? Huawu is dead, and I want to take revenge, but the Master doesn't allow me? He doesn't allow me, so why should I help him help that person? Why? That person deserves to die. He deserves to die the most. His Highness's voice was bold and aggressive. He looked at Rui coldly and said firmly, I don't accept it. Responsibility. Rui, who was covered in blood, looked as usual and said calmly, Your Highness has your responsibility. His Highness suddenly became silent and didn't speak for a long time. After a long time, he opened his mouth and said coldly, I just don't accept it. Rui chanted the name of Buddha, bowed slightly and sighed. Master said to be impartial. He didn't look at His Highness's expression or at the blood on his body, and turned to leave the villa. His Highness didn't stop him. Impartial? What a good impartial! The sneer on his face faded little by little, but his eyes were shining with stubborn light. Rui's figure walked out of the villa. The sound of the door closing came behind him. Chapter 240. What was the place of the final battle? When Li Tianlan asked Tribulation, his answer was simple, climb over the mountain in front of you. The undulating mountains were not actually peaceful. East Island used a lot of manpower to deal with the final battle. Countless patrol squads were scattered all over the battlefield. Tribulation and Li Tianlan, who deliberately suppressed their state, kept detouring in the mountains. It took them 2 hours to get close to the edge of the mountains, which was more than 10 kilometers away. The heavy rain swept the whole battlefield without warning. The messy water splashed down from high places. Under the sky, the mountains were hazy. The hillside in front of them, which had become clear gradually, was hidden in the rain again and became more and more blurred. The two of them kept speeding up in the heavy rain. In the end, they were walking in a straight line. At the most critical moment of the heavy rain, fighting and killing had become the only melody in Changdao. There was no pure land in the battlefield. Before Li Tianlan climbed over the hillside in front of him, the fierce battle had spread to the inside of the mountains. The rain was getting heavier, but the sound of the rain had disappeared here. Amidst the splashing rain, there were frenzied and concentrated gunshots and explosions everywhere. The loud noises completely drowned out the torrential rain. Occasionally, there would be an unwilling and angry roar, but it was quickly drowned out by the sound of explosions that filled the entire battlefield. Fine lightning flashed in the air. The moment the whole mountain was illuminated, several figures rushed up from the other side of the hillside. The rain was pouring down. A thick ice wall suddenly appeared less than 100 meters away from Li Tianlan. The ice walls were like 4 walls, completely covering the few people who had rushed into the mountain area. The sword intent danced and flashed in the cage formed by the ice walls. Gunshots rang out for a moment and then died away. In the flashing sound, the 4 huge ice walls completely shattered under the invisible pressure. Several corpses were thrown out with a lot of broken ice. A quiet and pretty figure stood quietly in the heavy rain. She looked around at the corpses around her. It should have been a very delicate and lovely figure, but at this time, in the heavy rain, she had an indescribable coldness. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. The woman in the rain saw him at the same time. Under the cover of the heavy rain, her body slightly stiffened, and there seemed to be panic in her eyes. Qingyan. Li Tianlan took a few steps forward and finally saw the woman in front of him. He said in a surprised voice, "Why are you here? Aren't you with Qianxia?" Brother Li. Amidst the chaos, Yu Qingyan, who had gotten together with Ning Qianxia in a very short time, smiled sweetly. Her voice carried the unique brightness and joy of a young girl. "You're really fine." Everyone was worried to death. Tribulation walked up to Li Tianlan silently and said nothing. Yu Qingyan, who did not notice the existence of Tribulation at all, was startled. She bowed and said obediently, "Hello, teacher." Tribulation nodded and said nothing. He just looked at Yu Qingyan in front of him with an unfathomable look. Li Tianlan did not notice this. He frowned briefly and asked calmly, "How is everyone now?" "Not so good." Yu Qingyan lowered her head and looked at the water falling in front of her. She whispered, "Many people have died, but we are all fine. I worked together with Qianxia, as well as some elites from the Eastern Theater of Operations, but we were separated just now. I'm going to look for him now. Big Brother Li, are you coming with me?" Li Tianlan was stunned and then glanced at Tribulation. Tribulation was still staring at Yu Qingyan. Noticing Li Tianlan's movement, he shook his head and said, "Nothing will happen for the time being. You go back with me first." Li Tianlan nodded. He was really not in a good state now. At least, he had to deal with some wounds completely. "You go first. Contact me anytime if you need anything." Li Tianlan looked at Yu Qingyan and said. Yu Qingyan was also a member of the East Emperor Palace. But at present, the East Emperor Palace did not have its own communication system. The system they used belonged to Sai City. However, Li Tianlan's equipment was completely damaged in the battle, so he had to get a replacement as soon as possible after returning. "Take care of yourself, Big Brother Li," Yu Qingyan wrinkled her nose and instructed in a serious tone. Li Tianlan nodded with a smile and went straight to the hillside ahead with Tribulation. The intense and scattered gunshots echoed in the night rain, getting clearer and crazier. The moment they were about to climb the hillside, Li Tianlan suddenly turned back. In his sight, Yu Qingyan was still standing there quietly not far away. Her eyes were like a pool of clear water without any ripples, soft and quiet, innocent and pure, with a little confusion. Noticing Li Tianlan's gaze, she smiled sweetly again and waved at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan remained calm and quietly watched Yu Qingyan turn around and go farther and farther in the night rain. "This girl is not simple," Tribulation suddenly said. "She is Yu Donglai's granddaughter. Elder Yu was one of Grandpa's guards in those days. His descendants are trustworthy," Li Tianlan said calmly and casually. In his sight, Yu Qingyan's figure seemed to be speeding up. Her shadow became more and more blurred and finally disappeared in the depths of the night rain. But she was still moving forward. The heavy rain drenched her, who had not yet entered the fire-flaming realm, but her eyes were always clear and bright. She had been moving at the fastest speed to the other side of the mountain with great clarity. Forward. Turning. Roundabout. The rain was getting heavier and heavier. Yu Qingyan was the only one walking silently in the whole mountain, patient and persistent. In the rain, she walked at the fastest speed for 7 or 8 kilometers. After confirming that no one was following her, she turned around and lightly set foot on the road on the other side of the mountain. Then she turned back. The road was slippery and straight leading forward. There were mountains on both sides of the road. Less than a kilometer ahead, there was an intersection. Turning left at the intersection and walking forward for 500 meters, she should see a small and ancient road marker. Yu Qingyan silently calculated and moved forward. Under the night rain, her figure was lonely and at a loss, like a lost elf. Everything was consistent with the information she had. Turning left at the intersection, this road would eventually lead to the outside of the battlefield. The road marker she was looking for stood quietly on the side of the road, lonely and inconspicuous. Yu Qingyan stood silently in front of the road marker and reached out to touch the wet stone marker. After hesitating for a long time, her slender palm exerted a little force, as if she wanted to pull the stone marker up. Ahem! A light cough sounded behind her and clearly passed through the rain. Like a frightened rabbit, Yu Qingyan turned around abruptly and looked behind her. A woman who looked about 30 years old appeared behind Yu Qingyan. Red leggings, a red women's shirt, and red high-heeled shoes. Under the heavy rain, the woman was like a flame burning proudly in the rain. Arrogant. This was the most obvious label on her. Yu Qingyan's eyes were flustered, but she bravely looked at the woman in red in front of her. This scene should not have happened in the plan. Now all this made her a little confused. "What are you hesitating for?" the woman in red said with a mocking look. Her face was extremely beautiful, which combined with her extremely proud temperament, suddenly made her look wild and gorgeous that made people crazy. "This belongs to us. His Highness gave it to your grandfather for safekeeping for the time being. What are you hesitating for now?" the woman in red said in a light tone. She was about the same height as Yu Qingyan, but standing together, she had an obvious condescending feeling. That's because no one will do better than my grandfather. That's why you chose us. That's all." Yu Qingyan plucked up the courage to look at the woman in red in front of her and said, "So what?" The woman in red's tone was cold. She reached out to Yu Qingyan and said, "Give it to me." Yu Qingyan hesitated for a while, and finally began to reach into her pocket and took out a crystal-clear bottle from it. This bottle was extremely small, but it was bright and resplendent. Its entire body was made of the highest quality crystal. 2 drops of indescribably magnificent fiery red liquid were contained in the bottle. The luster reflected off it, and a small part of the night sky nearby was reflected into a fiery red. The woman in red took the bottle and carefully put it away. She looked at Yu Qingyan and said coldly, "We shouldn't have met today, but you hesitated for too long. Go back and tell your grandfather that he'd better keep the things that don't belong to him. If he dares to have other ideas," she did not continue, but left behind a meaningful sneer. Yu Qingyan bit her lip and did not speak. The woman took a deep look at her, turned around and walked into the rain again. The meeting between the two sides was extremely hasty. It was like a deal, but also like a tacit understanding that was difficult for people to understand. Both the woman in red and Yu Qingyan knew what was in the bottle. It was the hottest poison in the dark world, code-named Suzuka blood. The woman in red also knew Yu Qingyan's name, origin, and all the background. But Yu Qingyan did not know that the woman in red's codename was Phoenix. Chapter 241. Li Tianlan finally climbed the hillside in the increasingly crazy rainstorm that seemed to drown Changdao. Behind the hillside was a vast and flat plain. The scenes of chaotic fighting and killing that he had imagined didn't appear. Instead, there was darkness and rain everywhere in front of Li Tianlan. Intense gunshots came from all directions. In the closest place to his line of sight, he could vaguely see the silhouettes of people fighting together. He couldn't tell which faction they belonged to. The air was violently distorted. Countless raindrops were like swords, splashing in all directions. One after another, ice walls rose in the night rain and then shattered. Occasionally, there was a fire in the distance. It burned fiercely for a moment and then went out. Blood splashed near Li Tianlan and instantly blended with the rain. The blood was hot. The rain was cold. Manic and angry roars sounded from time to time, as if they would never stop. The flat road was completely smashed in the battle. The green turf was lifted into the air. The tall trees fell down one by one. The flashing bullets flew back and forth in the air like shooting stars. Fighting, killing, bathing in blood, risking one's life. The final battle seemed to be white-hot, but it was unexpectedly messy. There were no tragic and heroic collisions between thousands of people. It seemed that it would never be the style of the Dark World. On this vast battlefield, a large number of elites were scattered in different places. When the battle was unprecedentedly fierce, Li Tianlan stood on a high place and felt that most of the place was empty. This is just a part of the final battle. Tribulation's voice sounded beside Li Tianlan. There are battles everywhere on the battlefield. This area in front of us is even a relatively small one. The heavy rain almost completely blocked Li Tianlan's sight. He couldn't tell how big this area was, but the vague figures were dozens of meters away from each other at the closest. The place of the final battle. In Changdao, every corner where the enemy could be seen was the place of the final battle. Rear, Li Tianlan opened his mouth. He just said 2 words, and then he fell silent. As expected, Tribulation smiled and said in a cold voice, "Rear? There is no rear. We only have a temporary station now. After all, this is the territory of Changdao. Here, we only have a way forward, not a back." Li Tianlan fell silent. He took a deep look at the battle in the dark. After a long time, he said softly, "Let's go." "Forward." Tribulation said, "The station is 6 kilometers away. 6 kilometers ahead from here." Li Tianlan knew that place. It used to be the station of Jifeng Sword Training School, and it was the first place where he was exposed. Sunset Shadow, the top assassin of Sai City, died together with the Big Dipper, an expert of the half-step invincible realm of Jifeng Sword Training School. Li Tianlan went down the mountain in silence. The closer they got to the station, the faster they moved. The station of Jifeng Sword Training School was now occupied by Zhongzhou State, and the forest around the village was also cordoned off. Tribulation and Li Tianlan successfully entered the village after passing through 3 cordons. The people of Zhongzhou State were having a meeting at this time. They said they were having a meeting, but they were actually waiting for news. The news from Huading had reached Changdao half a day ago. Huading was in a mess now, but fortunately, it didn't suffer too much damage because a large number of superiors imprisoned in Huading started to hide as soon as they got out, and then they tried to find a chance to return to East Island. East Island was their foundation. Now that their home was in complete chaos, they naturally had no time to avenge their imprisonment. Although the experts in Huading had also captured some people, more people had left Huading. The 5 invincible realm experts worked together to break out of the encirclement. Tianhai Wuji was slightly injured, Chaos, the commander of Knights Templars, was seriously injured, and Jiang Qianyan, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, was slightly injured. Although the injuries were different, the 5 experts had all broken out of the encirclement and were almost on their way back. Among the 5 great experts, Chaos of the Divine Temple, Huan Kong, the master of Fantasy World, and Jiang Qianyan, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, would definitely not come to East Island, especially Huan Kong and Chaos. Their foundations in Northern Europe and North America had long been destroyed by Situ Zhongyue and Gu Chenchuan. What they needed to do most was to go back and stabilize the overall situation. But Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengzangquan, the 2 local grandmasters of East Island, would definitely come to Changdao as soon as possible. Shinichi Miyamoto, who was in charge of the battlefield, was also there. 3 invincible realm experts. There were also a large number of East Island special warfare masters who had escaped from Huading. Once they returned to East Island, the final battle of Changdao would be inevitable. The situation in Zhongzhou State was getting worse and worse. Buying time had become their only choice. Before the 2 grandmasters, Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengzangquan, returned to Changdao with a large number of experts, Zhongzhou State had to inflict heavy damage on the remaining forces of East Island first, and then have a chance to win in the next severe situation. So half a day ago, Tribulation made a move. Not only Tribulation. Azure Dragon Gong Sun Chi of Zhongzhou State, Firmament of the Wang family of Beihai, Guzhendong of Kunlun City, Mount Shu, Eastern Theater of Operations, Shadow Sting Troop, all the experts walked out of the battlefield almost at the same time. The order to completely detonate the final battle was conveyed to everyone in Zhongzhou State. That was what Tribulation learned before he left. But in just half a day, Tribulation brought Li Tianlan back. When they walked into the temporary meeting room of the village, almost all the experts came back. The meeting room of the village was a relatively large bungalow with simple decorations. When Li Tianlan and Tribulation walked in, there were still many people standing in the meeting room. The atmosphere in the meeting room was a little depressing and scary, and everyone looked extremely gloomy. Li Tianlan's return caused a small commotion, but it soon subsided completely. There were only a few people who were worried about Li Tianlan. Li Beiyan, Ning Qianxing, Du Hanin, and other young people were not there. Deep Dream was standing with Thunder God of the Dongqing clan and Bai Yuming, the first miss of the Bai family. Seeing Li Tianlan, the gloomy expressions of the three eased a little at the same time. They nodded to Li Tianlan but did not speak. The atmosphere was a little strange. "It's good that you're back." Gong Sun Chi, who was sitting in the main seat, looked at Li Tianlan, nodded, and said, "How are you feeling?" "I need to deal with the wound, rest for a while, and eat something," Li Tianlan said in a calm tone. Gong Sun Chi nodded. When he was about to speak, Tribulation's low and hoarse voice had spread all over the room. Tianlan has wiped out the No. 6 Theater of Operations of East Island alone. Most of the experts, including Yue Kong, a half-step invincible realm expert, have died. Boom! There was an uproar, and a wave of voices rose in the somewhat narrow meeting room. Although there were many theaters of operations in East Island, there were no more than 10. Li Tianlan wiped out the No. 6 Theater of Operations alone, which meant that he wiped out more than 1/10 of the forces of East Island at this time. What kind of achievement was this? This kind of achievement had vaguely surpassed the meaning of the 4 words, "Young Heavenly Son." "But what are you doing?" Tribulation's voice continued. Gong Sun Chi's face changed. He took a deep look at Li Tianlan, nodded, and said, "Awesome. It's just a fluke." Li Tianlan looked tired and shook his head. Gong Sun Chi waved his hand and arranged Bai Yuming to take Li Tianlan out to have a rest. When the two figures disappeared, he smiled bitterly, looked at Tribulation, and said helplessly, "The situation has changed." Tribulation simply said, to express his doubt. "All the people of East Island have retreated." Gong Sun Chi took a deep breath and said calmly, "To be exact, all the experts have retreated. A few hours ago, a large number of cannon fodder suddenly appeared on the battlefield. Most of them didn't even enter the 4 realms of martial arts. Only a few reached the chi-controlling realm and the ice-condensing realm. As for their experts, none of them could be found." Tribulation's eyes narrowed. Cannon fodder? Even if they are cannon fodder, they are elites. I guess these people are probably from some secret forces of East Island. Who knows what they are when they take off their uniforms? At least for now, they are cannon fodder to consume our strength. Gong Sun Chi said coldly, "We can't find any experts, so we can only temporarily withdraw all the combat capability above the Thundershocking realm, leaving only our ordinary elites to deal with them. We are racing against time. Obviously, Shinichi Miyamoto has made up his mind to stall for time." Tribulation was silent. After a long time, he asked directly, "What's your plan?" "Cooperation." Gong Sun Chi said calmly, "This is the only way at present. Cooperation with the people of the 5 superpowers. 2 hours ago, I sent someone to contact the Heroes Club and the Polar Ground Alliance. When those people from East Island come back, we won't have a good time, and neither will they. So the best way now is to form a joint force. If we can cooperate, even if we can't win this final battle, we won't die." Tribulation raised his eyes and looked at the others in the conference room. Everyone had different expressions on their faces. Who could have thought that Zhongzhou State, which had the upper hand in the beginning, would be forced into such a dangerous situation? "What did they say?" Tribulation asked. "Still waiting for the news." Gong Sun Chi shook his head. But before he finished speaking, his face suddenly changed. The atmosphere in the conference room became slightly silent. Gong Sun-Chi's eyes suddenly became cold. No need to wait. He took a deep breath and said softly, I have received the news from my team. An hour ago, the Polar Ground Alliance refused our request for cooperation, and King Bear even slaughtered a squadron of the Shadow Sting army. Before everyone could get angry, Gong Sun-Chi continued, half an hour ago, the Heroes Club also attacked us. The Heroes Club also attacked us. The conference room fell into complete silence. The attitudes of the two superpowers were enough to explain too many problems. In just half a day, Zhongzhou State had gone from a dangerous situation to a desperate situation. Unconsciously. Chapter 242. Shinichi Miyamoto looked at the battlefield in front of him quietly. There were fights near the station of Zhongzhou State, and there were also sporadic fights around the headquarters of East Island. The general trend and the chaos intertwined. The battlefield of hundreds of kilometers in Changdao was like a quiet hell right now. Once there was a sound, it almost meant a fight. The quarrel behind him came from the huge and gorgeous tent. The voices were getting louder and louder, and the tone was getting sharper and sharper. The questions seemed to be directed at Shinichi Miyamoto, rude and presumptuous. Shinichi Miyamoto walked forward a little, leisurely enjoying the rainstorm in front of him. The distance between them was widened. The quarrel behind him suddenly quieted down. Shinichi Miyamoto lowered his head to look at the time on his watch and frowned. The quarrel behind him became clear for a moment, and then it became blurred again. The curtain of the huge and gorgeous tent in the center of the headquarters was lifted and then put down. A slim figure in red walked up to Shinichi Miyamoto with an angry look on her face. This was a young woman who looked to be only 25 or 26 years old. She was over 1.6 meters tall and looked very petite, but her face was extremely charming, seductive and wild. The woman wore a long red dress with a high slit. There was a strong wind in the night rain, which blew up the hem of her dress. A pair of white and slender legs were suddenly exposed in the air. In the messy rainstorm, the red figure stood behind Shinichi Miyamoto, and the whole night seemed to be more colorful and fragrant. Master, those people are too much. The woman looked at Shinichi Miyamoto, who was motionless, and said while biting her pink lips. She was extremely beautiful and charming. Even though she was angry at this moment, she gave off a delicate feeling that seemed to be both angry and resentful at the same time. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't say anything. The woman looked more and more aggrieved. She had a long red silk tied around her waist, which tightly wrapped around her slender waist. The two ends of the red silk hung down to her thighs. Two small folding fans were tied to the two ends of the red silk, swaying gently in the wind. The woman reached out and grabbed the folding fans along the red silk. With a swish, she opened the folding fans. The blades of the fans tore the curtain of rain apart violently, and a scorching heat wave rose in the cool rain. I really want to kill all those people. They are like mad dogs, biting people everywhere. Master, can I go in and kill them? The woman smiled sweetly, and a cold, killing intent immediately burst out from her smile that could captivate one's soul. They are the ones who died. It's normal for them to be agitated. Shinichi Miyamoto looked back at his best disciple and said in a calm tone, agitation and insult are two different things. Do they really think they can insult our special warfare area just because they are generals? Well, they seem to be quarreling with High Priest Tianyue, but in fact, you are our master, there you. The woman said hatefully, and her charming smile became even more resentful. Shinichi Miyamoto smiled and didn't say anything. He was the one who gave the order to East Island's current turtle-like tactic. If the superiors withdrew temporarily, it was necessary to send a large number of elites to fill in the gaps and even to consume the enemy's strength. Miyamoto, Anli. But the term cannon fodder was limited to this battlefield. After all, this was a dark collision between superpowers and countries. Zhongzhou State had more than 1,000 people in Changdao right now. It wasn't a lot, but each of them had at least entered the 4 realms of martial arts. How could ordinary Miyamoto hurt them. The so-called Miyamoto sent out were all the elite troops of the East Island Army. This was the home court of East Island. As long as the soldiers took off their uniforms and military ranks, who could say they were soldiers? Even if everyone knew it, no one would say they were breaking the rules. They had the home court advantage. If Shinichi Miyamoto said they were combatants of the special warfare system, then they were. In this way, Shinichi Miyamoto wouldn't face the pressure from the outside, but he would face the pressure from the inside. The East Island Miyamoto, cannon fodder wandering in the battlefield, were actually the elites of the East Island Army, and they were temporarily integrated into the special warfare system. But Shinichi Miyamoto asked them to be Miyamoto to consume the enemy's combat power. As soon as the decision was announced, Shinichi Miyamoto received strong protests from the military. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't care. He was the commander-in-chief of the battlefield, and his orders were absolute. As soon as the order was issued, nearly 6,000 Miyamoto cannon fodder were sent to the battlefield. They were simply the most expensive batch of Miyamoto cannon fodder. But Shinichi Miyamoto sent them out without hesitation to consume the power of Zhongzhou State, delay the attack of Zhongzhou State, and achieve the final victory. This method was understandable, but not everyone could accept it. Several generals of the military in Changdao came to the general headquarters as soon as possible. The cannon fodder sent by Shinichi Miyamoto were the elites of the military, and most of them were elites from some ace armies. And the generals who came to the general headquarters were also from the ace armies. They could be said to be the most powerful force in the military. Shinichi Miyamoto avoided meeting these people. He asked Tianyu, the high priest of Ise Grand Shrine, to handle everything, and asked his best disciple, Mai Shiranui, to participate in the discussion. As a result, not long after the meeting started, Mai Shiranui was mocked by several generals and almost lost her temper on the spot. After she left in anger, the meeting in the tent suddenly became more lively. That's expected. Shinichi Miyamoto was silent for a while, then shook his head and said calmly, "Watch the rain." Mai Shiranui opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but she finally kept silent and watched the boring night rain with Shinichi Miyamoto. The quarrel in the back became louder and clearer in the night. A trace of distress and irritation flashed between Mai Shiranui's charming eyebrows. She suddenly asked, "Is it true?" Shinichi Miyamoto expressed his doubt. Mai Shiranui, who had been with Shinichi Miyamoto since she was a child, didn't have much awe for her master. She only had a kind of respect and concern from the bottom of her heart, as if he was her father's daughter. "I heard some rumors about you, master." In the heavy rain, Mai Shiranui whispered. Shinichi Miyamoto was indifferent. "And I saw the crown prince yesterday. He was a little annoying and frivolous." Shinichi Miyamoto turned around and took a deep look at Mai Shiranui. A cold light flashed in his eyes. "Master, your status in East Island is no less than that of Gu Xingyun in Zhongzhou State. You just used some cannon fodder, and it wasn't out of selfishness. Although those generals have great power, how could they have the guts to come here and criticize you?" Shinichi Miyamoto suddenly interrupted Mai Shiranui and said in a calm tone, "Someone has to be responsible for some things." Mai Shiranui's face suddenly changed, and she was a little panicked. She muttered to herself, "So, the rumors are true?" In fact, there had been rumors for a long time. In the first few days of the Battle of Changdao, the situation in East Island was extremely grim, and people in all walks of life were in a panic. After the battle, the future of the special warfare system of East Island was temporarily unknown, but the economy suffered a fatal blow, which was irreparable. And now it seemed that even in the final battle, Shinichi Miyamoto didn't show a satisfactory attitude to the authorities of East Island and suffered heavy losses. Under such circumstances, how could there be no rumors? Recently, a lot of people said that East Island suffered such a huge loss because of Shinichi Miyamoto's hesitation at the beginning and his incompetence after arriving in Changdao. There seemed to be a force secretly trying to blame all the losses of East Island on Shinichi Miyamoto. Because of this, when Mai Shiranui met the Crown Prince yesterday, he made an almost blatant hint. Because of this, The military generals who usually wouldn't be taken seriously by Shinichi Miyamoto dared to come and question him. "Master, what's the attitude of the royals?" Mai Shiranui suddenly asked. "The result hasn't come out yet. What attitude can the royals have?" Shinichi Miyamoto shook his head. Mai Shiranui didn't believe it. At this time, the royals' lack of attitude was actually a kind of implicit support. But if they really supported him, why would the Crown Prince say those words to him yesterday? The Crown Prince. Mai Shiranui wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "Huh." Shinichi Miyamoto smiled and said calmly, "In this kind of thing, he's not important enough. Don't worry, it'll be fine." Shinichi Miyamoto glanced at Mai Shiranui and said slowly, "At most, he will give up the leadership of the Divine Wind Force." He said it casually, but Mai Shiranui clearly saw a touch of darkness deep in his eyes. "Is there no other way?" Mai Shiranui asked softly. Shinichi Miyamoto's lips moved. When he was about to speak, two figures hurried through the night rain and quickly came to Shinichi Miyamoto. The two imperial guards around the Mikado. "Glacier. Tide." Shinichi Miyamoto glanced at them and said softly, "Is there any news?" Glacier nodded seriously. His eyes were shining with unspeakable excitement. "His Highness Tianhai Wuji has just got in touch with the royals. It is expected that he will come to Changdao in 15 hours. The bright light flashed in Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes, but he remained calm and set his eyes on Tide. "What did they say?" Shinichi Miyamoto asked. The they he mentioned, of course, didn't refer to the people of East Island, but the dark superpowers that were still entrenched in Changdao. Zhongzhou State, which had the upper hand, was in danger. In just a dozen hours, the power of East Island would change dramatically and completely overwhelm Zhongzhou State. At this time, the attitude of the other dark forces would become extremely important. Under such circumstances, Zhongzhou State would send people to talk about cooperation with the dark forces. East Island would naturally send people to test their attitude. The five superpowers cooperated and competed with each other. Under such circumstances, what choice would they make? Withdraw from Changdao? Attack East Island with Zhongzhou State? Plot against Zhongzhou State with East Island? All seemed possible. Shinichi Miyamoto hoped that he could get a third attitude. The five dark forces conspired with East Island to plot against Zhongzhou State. In this way, the crisis of East Island would be completely resolved. Even after the war, he could deal with his negligence more easily. East Island was about to receive great support. At this time, it was possible to persuade the five dark forces to deal with Zhongzhou State together. The most important thing was what price Shinichi Miyamoto or East Island could pay. They agreed to do it. Tide said softly, "More than an hour ago, the Polar Ground Alliance and the Heroes Club even killed a small part of the elites of Zhongzhou State to show their sincerity. It's just that they seem to be asking for too much." "What do they want?" Shinichi Miyamoto's tone was gentle, but his eyes were shining brighter and brighter. "The Jiang family of South America wants Li Tianlan. They only want Li Tianlan." Tide thought for a while and said. Shinichi Miyamoto listened calmly. Tide continued, "Knights Templars want to establish East Asia Diocese. This should be the will of the Vatican. The Polar Ground Alliance. King Bear didn't put forward any conditions. He just said he was willing to help. Fantasy World and the Heroes Club have the same conditions. They..." Tide glanced at Shinichi Miyamoto and seemed to hesitate. "Say it." Shinichi Miyamoto said calmly. Tide gritted his teeth and didn't look at Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes. He turned his head and said quickly, "These two forces want Liuhua Palace." Liuhua Palace? Different from the Divine Wind Force, this was Shinichi Miyamoto's own foundation. A foundation that only belonged to him. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't get angry. His eyes lit up again, and he raised the corner of his mouth with an enigmatic smile. Mai Shiranui looked angry. When she was about to say something, Shinichi Miyamoto waved his hand and said firmly, "If they want it, then give it to them. We can't wait anymore. Pass the order, everyone take the initiative to attack Zhongzhou at all costs." He looked at Mai Shiranui, the Glacier, and Tide. Chapter 243. Like the last time, Li Tianlan woke up after sleeping for less than 3 hours. He was really sober. As soon as he opened his eyes, his fatigue and sleepiness disappeared completely. The light in the room was on. The soft light shone on the mottled walls, and the shabby furniture was faintly visible. It was still a long night outside the window. The rain was hazy, and the darkness and humidity filled every corner of Changdao. Li Tianlan was stunned for a while, then he slowly sat up and pulled out the infusion bottle in his hand. The pain in his body was still there. Those gunshot wounds and knife wounds of different depths were entangled with the drugs, stimulating his nerves. It hurt a lot, but it was comfortable. For Li Tianlan, it was comfortable not to be hungry or tired. After breaking through the limit, his willpower kept him sober and rational from beginning to end. In this state, Li Tianlan couldn't even faint. He was like the most perfect fighting machine. With a strong willpower that could break gold and crack stones, he only lacked physical strength. As long as he recovered a little, he would be able to break out the most powerful combat capability. But his injuries were getting worse. He could still fight, but no one was optimistic about the consequences if he continued. Even a machine could be completely damaged after overloading, let alone a human being. Li Tianlan stood up, looking calm. At least for now, on this battlefield where there was no rear, he was not qualified to think about other things. On the battlefield, to live was to kill the enemy, and to close his eyes was equal to death. As for the future, there was no rear on the battlefield, so there was no future. Outside the window, the night was dark and thick. Time passed slowly and steadily in the heavy rain. Li Tianlan looked out of the window. The 7th day was approaching. One more day. If everything went well, they should be on their way back to Zhongzhou State at this time tomorrow. But whether it went well or not, how many of them, the elites from Zhongzhou State, could go back? Li Tianlan turned and walked out of the door. The moment the door was opened, a slim figure put her hand on the doorknob, as if she wanted to come in. Li Tianlan's hand pulled the door inward, and the person outside the door pushed the door inward. Both sides were caught off guard. A soft and fragrant figure fell directly into Li Tianlan's arms, and her hands subconsciously hugged his waist. Li Tianlan's eyes turned cold for a moment. He almost instinctively wanted to take action, but he relaxed when he saw who it was. Sister Bai. He looked at Bai Yuming, who seemed to have not reacted yet, and took the initiative to greet her. Bai Yuming was obviously absent-minded. After a few seconds, she responded, "Ah, you're awake? How do you feel?" "Not bad." Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed because Bai Yuming had been in his arms and didn't want to leave until now. He changed the topic stiffly. "How is it outside?" "Not so good. I should say very bad." Bai Yuming shook her head and naturally stood up straight. She pinched Li Tianlan's arm and said with a smile, "Not bad. Although the injury is a little serious, your body is very strong." Li Tianlan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When he was about to say something, Bai Yuming had thrown the bag in her hand into his arms. "Put it on. Samsara sent it here 2 days ago and said it was for you. It's a good thing. In the current situation, safety comes first." Li Tianlan took the bag and felt that it was unexpectedly heavy, at least 7 or 8 kilograms. There was a white coat in the bag. The white shirt was slim-fitting and very long. Even though it was summer, it could already be considered a long trench coat. However, the clothes felt extremely cold to the touch, so it shouldn't feel hot when worn on the body. However, wearing such clothes on a summer day, Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he didn't know what to say for a while. This is cloud silk. Even in the dark world, it's a rare thing. It's warm in winter and cool in summer, and impervious to fire and water. Is it also impervious to swords and guns? Li Tianlan interrupted Bai Yuming with a bitter smile. More than that. Bai Yuming rolled her eyes at him. This thing can also absorb power. Few people under the thunder-shocking realm can break the defense of cloud silk. Even if I do it myself, the power transmitted to you through cloud silk will be weakened a lot. Cloud silk is the highest-end material in the dark world, second only to murderous weapons. At present, only Zhongzhou State, Star State, and Snow Country can master this technology. Such a coat is all made of cloud silk. Not to mention whether Samsara's technology is up to standard, just for these cloud silk, I don't know how much blood they will shed. This kind of thing is likely to cause a battle between superiors of the invincible realm. She reached out her hand and flicked on the coat. There seemed to be wind and thunder in the air. Bai Yoming's slender fingertips flicked on the coat, but the pure white and soft fabric clearly made the sound of gold and iron, and even some sparks splashed. There are few of these things in Zhongzhou State. It's not that they can't make them, but it's a complete waste to use cloud silk to make clothes. If it wasn't for the fact that you're my younger brother, I might have kept these clothes for myself without telling you and Samsara. If I can take it back to the Bai family afterward, it can be regarded as the most precious treasure of the family. Bai Yoming's eyes were a little hot and envious. She suddenly tilted her head and said with a smile, "What's the matter with you and Qin Weibai? You haven't known each other for long, but that woman seems to be willing to give you everything without complaint or regret. Did she owe you in her previous life?" Li Tianlan laughed at himself, put on the coat, and didn't speak. The white coat was very close to his body, and on him, there was a kind of pure and slender charm. The feeling of the coat sticking to his body through the inner lining was cool and soft, with a trace of warmth, just like the body temperature of Qin Weibai when he held her in his arms. Unfortunately, it didn't have that natural and rich fragrance. Li Tianlan suddenly remembered that he hadn't smelled Qin Weibai's scent for a long time. He missed her very much. Li Tianlan gently touched the white coat on his body and said to himself, "I haven't seen her for a long time. If this retreat goes well, you should be able to see her in Huading at this time tomorrow." Bai Yuming said with a smile, and the seriousness in her eyes became clearer and clearer. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his head and looked at Bai Yuming. "Retreat? We can only retreat." Bai Yoming's tone was calm but a little unwilling. Li Tianlan didn't speak. He looked at Bai Yuming quietly, waiting for her explanation. Zhongzhou State was plotting against East Island. The momentum was so powerful that it shocked the whole dark world. From Huading to East Island, to Northern Europe, and then to North America, layers upon layers of arrangements, great efforts, and countless sacrifices were made. At this time, when there was no result, they actually wanted to retreat? Who could be willing? Most of the elites of East Island trapped in Huading have broken out successfully. Bai Yuming said blandly, "Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengzangquan, the two grandmasters of the invincible realm, will probably arrive in Changdao tomorrow, and they will be followed by a large number of masters of the special warfare system of East Island. We can't do this." What could they do even if they were unwilling? The general trend was like this: who could do anything? We can race against time with East Island. Li Tianlan felt aggrieved. For Zhongzhou State, he might not have a clear sense of belonging, but for the first time since he entered the secular world, he did one thing with all his heart: fighting, fleeing, and risking his life. All of this, at the most critical moment, he actually had to retreat. This kind of grievance really made him angry. "There's no time. If we delay, we'll die." Bai Yuming shook her head and said in a cold tone, "The Heroes Club and the Polar Ground Alliance have already started to attack us. For the time being, we can't be sure whether they have reached an agreement with East Island or not, but the two invincible realm masters of East Island are about to return. If they can't get East Island, they will cooperate with East Island to suppress Zhongzhou State. This is very likely. But we can't afford such a loss, so we can only retreat." The Polar Ground Alliance and the Heroes Club's attack was probably a precursor. Before things were clear, the five superpowers in the Dark World had always taken an attitude of cooperation. Since the two superpowers attacked Zhongzhou State first, the other three superpowers would definitely show their attitudes. East Island and the five superpowers joined hands to attack Zhongzhou State. For the elites of Zhongzhou State in Changdao, this was completely a hopeless situation. "Can we retreat?" Li Tianlan quickly calmed down. He was silent for a while and suddenly asked, "We need to sacrifice. You, Wang Xingxiao, and Gu Hanshan must go. The most elite and the youngest force, including me, must retreat as soon as possible. The others?" Bai Yuming said dryly, but she didn't finish her words. She didn't need to finish her words. The others were naturally cannon fodder. But such cannon fodder was not those with weak strength, but those with the strongest strength, including several masters of the half-step invincible realm. Without enough strength, how could they cover their retreat? All the sacrifices are worth it. As if she was hypnotizing herself, Bai Yuming said, "It's much better than being annihilated." Not to mention the others, just Li Tianlan and Gu Hanshan. If Wang Shengxiao and the other two died here, Zhongzhou State would lose 3 invincible realm masters in the next few decades. Such a loss was enough to damage Zhongzhou State's right to speak in the dark world to the greatest extent. So other people could be sacrificed, but these 3 young heavenly sons must be kept at all costs. No one knew how many people could retreat successfully this time. But as long as Li Tianlan and the other 2 could leave, Zhongzhou State would not be completely defeated. But even if the 3 of them could leave, what Zhongzhou State would face next would be the heaviest loss in recent decades or even hundreds of years. If this plan failed, Zhongzhou State's power in the dark world would greatly regress. But now the decision to retreat had been made, which was enough to show that Zhongzhou State was ready to face this consequence. Is there no other way? Li Tianlan looked at Bai Yuming and asked. Dressed in white, he stood straight in front of Bai Yuming. His whole body was filled with a kind of heart-palpitating sharpness. East Island has no other way but to find a way to make up for the loss in other places. Bai Yuming shook her head. Other places? But Li Tianlan's tone was sharp. A cold light flashed in Bai Yuming's eyes, and she said word by word, Annan State. In any case, the rebellion in Annan State could be said to be the beginning of Zhongzhou State from an advantage to a disadvantage. If Zhongzhou State wanted to make up for it, it could only start from Annan State. I can still fight. Li Tianlan's tone was low and determined. Bai Yuming took a deep breath and sighed. It's the general trend. Tianlan, you'd better go with the flow. It's the most important thing for Zhongzhou State that the 3 of you are alive. A phone suddenly rang. Bai Yuming took out her mobile phone and looked at it. It was a strange number. Surprised, she answered the phone and said, Hello. Well, it's me. Yes, Tianlan is here. You are? She spoke quickly and finally handed the phone to Li Tianlan. She said with a strange look in her eyes, Military counselor of Samsara can't contact you, so he came to me. He should also advise you to leave. Li Tianlan frowned, took the phone and said directly, I'm Li Tianlan. The phone was filled with the sound of violent rain. The rain hit the woods and made a pitter-patter. Li Tianlan suddenly had a feeling of palpitation in his heart again. It was like the palpitation and panic when he suddenly woke up on the back of tribulation, as if he had lost the most important thing. On the phone, military counselor's voice finally sounded, hoarse and tired. Young Master Li, the boss is missing in Changdao. Li Tianlan's brain buzzed, and the whole brain became blank for a moment. In the night sky outside the window, a large piece of flashing thunder suddenly lit up the sky. In Li Tianlan's deathly silence, a thunderclap that seemed to split the whole Changdao suddenly swept across the night rain. The thunder suppressed everything. The dim light in the room suddenly went out in the thunder. In the darkness, Bai Yuming subconsciously called Tianlan softly. There was no response. Bai Yuming's face changed. When she waved her hand, a piece of blue light lit up. Under the faint electric light, Li Tianlan's figure had disappeared. Bai Yuming, whose face changed dramatically, rushed out of the room as fast as she could. It was still raining heavily outside the room. The aftermath of the thunder shook the sky. The sky seemed to be covered with white. In the increasingly heavy rain, the late night of the 6th day was passing. Dawn was about to break in the sky. Chapter 244. Chilly wind. Cold rain. Lightning flashed and thunder roared. On the last day of the final battle, Changdao looked particularly manic and depressing at dawn. The boundless rain splashed in the high sky. In the raging wind and rain, the whole world seemed to become twisted and crazy in the darkness. A fierce white shadow crossed the temporary station of Zhongzhou State when the wind and rain were the most violent, and rushed out of the village. The heavy rain and cold wind were blowing in the air at the same time. At the moment when everyone was discussing how to retreat, everyone in the entire station of Zhongzhou State clearly felt the strong and almost suffocating killing intent. The white shadow crossed the sky, like a white rainbow crossing the night curtain in the heavy rain. Wherever the white shadow passed, the wind and rain all over the sky broke and dissipated. The air was vibrating, and the extremely fierce killing intent kept condensing. In a very short time, it reached the peak state that shocked most people. The retreating wind. The broken rain. The white shadow passed through the wind and rain. When it was about to rush out of the village, a black shadow suddenly began to condense in front of the white shadow. The sharp and arrogant sword intent almost unscrupulously swept through every corner of the space. Where the white shadow stood, the wind and rain retreated, but only this black shadow was condensing quickly and quietly, becoming clearer and clearer. The white shadow stopped on the way forward. The next moment, Tribulation and the black shadow changed positions and stood in front of the white shadow. The silver mask covered Tribulation's face. The Lord of Shadow in the dark world seemed to always be calm and cold, neither sad nor happy, neither arrogant nor rash. The heavy rain covered the old and shabby village below, and the mountains and forests not far away became blurred in the rain. The white sky began to fill the night. The light gradually brightened, but the place where the two stood gradually became blurred. "Where are we going?" Tribulation asked. Li Tianlan stopped. Dressed in pure white, he was hovering in the air at this time, with an indescribable style. Fierce, peaceful, determined, and proud. Looking at Tribulation in front of him, Li Tianlan bowed deeply, almost lowering his head to the ground. Above the sky, the greatest respect was nothing more than this. "Greetings, martial uncle." Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Tribulation's pupils contracted fiercely, and he didn't speak. He had not been in contact with Li Tianlan for a long time, but he thought he had some understanding of this martial nephew. Li Tianlan had never been so polite to him. Wasn't this kind of politeness and respect also another kind of resolution that didn't care about anything? "Where to?" After a moment of silence, he asked again. "Xiaobai is missing. I'll find her." Li Tianlan said lightly. "No." The silver mask covered Tribulation's expression. His eyes flickered slightly, and then he said resolutely, "We're already making a retreat plan. You're on the first list to retreat. Go back. If there are any clues, I'll bring Chief Qin back for you." Li Tianlan shook his head and said in a flat but unquestionable tone, "I have to go." It was raining cats and dogs. It was like a splash of water falling from the sky. All of a sudden, Li Tianlan's killing intent completely disappeared. Under the vast night sky, sword intent overflowed and countless raindrops fell rapidly. Dense sword chi whistled in every drop of rain. The raindrops became cold and sharp, and a gust of cold sword intent emanated from the rainwater without warning. "You want to fight me?" Tribulation's voice suddenly rose a little. His tone was still hoarse and gloomy, but his low tone spread through the night rain and instantly spread through half of the village. Everyone came out of their rooms and looked up at the two men who seemed to be confronting each other in the air. The young governor of Sai City. The deputy governor of Sai City. What were they going to do at this time? Li Tianlan looked at Tribulation quietly. He still didn't look angry, but there was a hint of complicated emotions in his eyes. He bowed deeply again and said calmly, "I don't want to." He said he didn't want to, but at the moment when they looked at each other, Tribulation saw determination in Li Tianlan's eyes. And only determination. Tribulation suddenly felt powerless. Qin Weibai actually came to Changdao. This wasn't part of the plan. What was more unexpected was that she disappeared in Changdao. In such a complicated situation, with Qin Weibai's importance, anyone who found Qin Weibai, who didn't know martial arts, would not let her go easily. It was a normal choice to take her away. Tribulation didn't not know this news. In fact, he knew it earlier than Li Tianlan. But now, not to mention that the cooperation between Samsara and Zhongzhou State seemed to be united, even if the two sides were still close. In such a dangerous situation, Zhongzhou State could only take care of itself first. Military counselor didn't wait for a clear response and support from Zhongzhou State, So he informed Li Tianlan. This was also understandable. Li Tianlan would definitely take action when he got the news. But if he took action, Tribulation wouldn't be the only one who had a headache. Tribulation thought for a while. He was not good at talking, and persuading people was not what he was good at. He slowly opened his mouth and said word by word, "In this situation, even if you get out of the way." Li Tianlan said directly before he finished. Qin Weibai's whereabouts were unknown, and he couldn't waste time. He couldn't afford to waste a second. He took a step forward. At this moment, Li Tianlan was high in the sky, but his whole body seemed to shine like a bright moon. "I have to go," he said firmly. "What can you do if you go? Where can you go now?" The 5 dark forces and East Island are all suspected of taking Qin Weibai away. Are you going to check them one by one? Even if you go, can you bring her back? Tribulation's voice suddenly became extremely cold. Li Tianlan didn't stop at all and went straight forward. "I can," he said softly in a casual tone, but behind this casual tone, there was almost desperate madness and confidence. He moved forward slowly. At this moment, everyone knew that as long as Tribulation didn't give way, this battle was doomed to be inevitable. Li Tianlan didn't want to take action, but it didn't mean he couldn't. He had to go. He had to go to the place where Qin Weibai disappeared at the beginning, meet with military counselor first, and then search for her bit by bit. In any case, he had to bring Qin Weibai back. Li Tianlan's expression grew calmer, but there were 2 balls of blazing fire in his eyes, with persistence and coldness that could burn him into ashes. At this moment, Li Tianlan didn't think about the Li family or the future. His mind was full of Qin Weibai. It was not her unparalleled beauty that could cause the downfall of countries and cities, nor was it her gentleness and strength in front of others. The 2 of them had never said sweet words or made vows of undying love. At this moment, what Li Tianlan recalled the most was Qin Weibai's every move and look when they were together. Those details that he had never cared about emerged bit by bit. Her eyes were as clear as water and as gentle as clouds. Whether it was charming or enchanting, whether it was cold or blurred, when that pair of eyes that were as bright as the Milky Way faced him, they always carried a kind of deep affection that was engraved into the bones, engraved into the depths of the soul. Li Tianlan chuckled. At the moment when he was about to pass by Tribulation, he solemnly told himself that he would never let her down even if he was smashed to pieces and doomed eternally. Tribulation stepped aside. Li Tianlan walked into the wind and rain. Without hesitation. "Have you ever thought about the consequences?" Tribulation's voice came from behind. "Outside the village, everyone is an enemy. Only you, only yourself. So what? If you don't come back, you don't come back." Tribulation was so angry that he laughed and said in a deep voice, "What will happen to the Li family in the future?" Li Tianlan's figure was about to disappear. His voice came from the front and was clear. "The existence of the Li family is to protect what we want to protect and what we deserve to protect. If I can't even protect my own woman, what's the point of the so-called Li family no matter how glorious it is? What does it have to do with me?" He landed on the ground. He walked out of the village and into the mountain forest. The sky gradually lit up with white light. The wind and rain were dark. Tribulation stood where he was, looking at the blurred distance. All of a sudden, the soaring sword intent brought with it a blazing flame and shot up into the sky with a loud bang. The sword intent tore the sky, and the fire spread wildly. In an instant, the raging fire covered the mountain forest in the heavy rain. The flame surged and rose against the trend. The fire rushed into the rain curtain like a torrent, illuminating the morning sky. Countless raindrops were flowing with flames, covering the mountain forest. The sky was raining fire. In response to the fire rain, there was a large expanse of ghastly and dazzling lightning. A large expanse of lightning spread and danced in the air, from high altitude to the ground. At the moment when the fire and lightning intertwined, a huge shock wave accompanied by a loud roar sounded in the mountain forest. There was a loud bang. Countless trees collapsed and burst into pieces. Li Tianlan's advancing figure retreated at a faster speed, or rather, flew back. Boom! His figure completely lost control and crashed into the village, crashing into a bungalow at the entrance of the village. The bungalow completely collapsed, and the dust was flying. Li Tianlan's figure directly sank into a large pile of stone bricks. Tribulation's expression was solemn. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the mountain forest. Gong Sun Qi, Firmament, and Gu Zhendong immediately appeared beside Tribulation. Before anyone could speak, there was a large number of footsteps in the mountain forest. The sonorous footsteps were deafening like thunder in the night rain. Boundless figures all over the mountains appeared from all directions of the mountain forest, like a crowd in the night rain. The black tide of people pushed forward, completely surrounding the village that was already endless. Silently, a figure seemed to step out of the void and stopped in front of Tribulation. Shinichi Miyamoto, who was wearing a black scarf and wearing a tight ninja costume, stood quietly in the void with a dagger in his hand. His soft voice, which sounded like he was murmuring to himself, resounded through the sky. "No one can leave here today except the dead." Tribulation was silent and didn't say a word. In the crowd, he saw a lot of familiar figures. In the dense crowd, most of them were the cannon fodder of East Island. But those superiors hiding in the cannon fodder were still dazzling. He saw Tianyu, the high priest of ISE Grand Shrine. He saw Tide of the Glacier. He saw Ban of the Heroes Club. He saw King Bear of the Polar Ground Alliance. He also saw Xing of Knights Templars and Crow of Fantasy World. Before Zhongzhou State's retreat plan was officially implemented, all the forces of East Island had joined hands to attack in the shortest time. In the morning, the soldiers were at the gate of the city. It was solemn in the village. In addition to the solemnity in everyone's heart, there was only some panic that they didn't want to admit. Until a chaotic sound rang out. In the ruins at the entrance of the village, countless bricks and stones flew up in a loud noise. The wind and rain were fierce. Li Tianlan, who was dressed in white without a speck of dust, walked out of the ruins. He didn't gather with anyone from Zhongzhou State. He just walked up to the sky and walked forward alone. In the crowd, Dongqing Rushi silently watched the figure walking higher and higher in the sky, and her face was in a trance. One of her eyes became more and more blank and innocent, while the other clear and beautiful pupil was full of a complicated look and even a little intoxicated. In the farthest part of the crowd, in the void far away from East Island and Zhongzhou State, the air was slightly twisted. A slim white figure with a long sword on her back and a red dagger on her waist stared blankly at Li Tianlan, who was climbing up to the sky. In such a long distance, under the heavy rain, the young white figure in her sight was already blurred, but she clearly saw the familiar pride. That was the arrogant will that dared to despise heaven and earth. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Li Tianlan finally walked up to the sky, to the highest place. The silver human emperor stretched out in his hand and turned into the ultimate form of sky halberd. Two scarlet spear blades stretched out, elegant and complicated. Li Tianlan stood in the highest position, holding the human emperor and looking around. The crowd in his sight was still surging, as if it had filled the whole world. They were all enemies. Li Tianlan gently raised the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were cold. In the silence, he spoke first, and his tone was calm. "My name is Li Tianlan." As he spoke, he stared directly at the most powerful expert of the invincible realm, Shinichi Miyamoto. "Qin Weibai is my woman. 2 hours ago, she disappeared near the number 6 theater of operations." Li Tianlan paused and looked at Shinichi Miyamoto. "You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.